Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, happiness, self-worth, and peace always feel just out of reach? Like every time you achieve something, the satisfaction fades and you're left chasing the next goal? That's because most of us are living under hidden distortions of the mind, false beliefs that shape how we see ourselves, how we see others, and how we live our lives. These distortions control your confidence, your choices, and your relationships far more than you realize. But here's the truth. Once you learn to recognize them, you can break free. In this video, we're diving deep into the subtle ways your mind traps you and how to finally escape the cycle. If you're ready to challenge your limits, uncover the patterns that hold you back, and reclaim your inner strength, make sure you watch this video all the way through. And if this resonates, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because you don't want to miss the next deep dive into transforming your mind and your life. Black and white thinking. Black and white thinking is one of the most common mental traps, and it quietly destroys perspective. It's the tendency to split the world into two extremes. Something is either all good or all bad, completely right or entirely wrong, a total success or an absolute failure. There is no middle ground. At first, this type of thinking might seem harmless, even logical. After all, labeling things makes them easier to understand. But life is rarely so simple, and when we force everything into rigid categories, we erase the shades of gray that hold truth, growth, and possibility. Imagine a student who gets a B on an exam. Instead of recognizing the solid effort, they call themselves a failure. Or picture a professional who stumbles during a presentation and immediately decides they are terrible at their job. These conclusions don't reflect reality, but in the black and white mindset, even the smallest imperfection equals complete defeat. This kind of thinking also damages relationships. If a friend cancels plans, the person trapped in extremes may instantly assume they're unwanted or unloved. They don't stop to consider that their friend might be tired, overwhelmed, or simply in need of rest. Instead, they jump straight to rejection. That rigid conclusion creates unnecessary pain and tension, all because nuance was ignored. The same pattern appears in self-perception. People begin to believe they are either successful or worthless, attractive or ugly, capable or incompetent. There's no room for being good enough or improving. If something doesn't fit neatly into the good category, it automatically falls into the bad one. This creates harsh self-criticism and a cycle of low confidence. Decision-making also becomes a struggle under black and white thinking. A person considering a career change may think they have only two options: stay stuck in their current job forever, or recklessly quit with no safety net. The reality is that countless alternatives exist: researching opportunities, taking evening classes, slowly building new skills, but extremes blind them to those possibilities. Even emotions get trapped in this rigid frame. If someone wakes up feeling sad, they might assume the entire day is ruined. If they argue with their partner, they might think the whole relationship is doomed. But emotions are fluid, they shift and change. When people see them as permanent truths, they suffer unnecessarily. Social issues, parenting, and even health goals fall victim to the same pattern. A parent may think their child is either well-behaved or a problem. Someone trying to eat healthy might believe that one unhealthy meal means the entire effort is destroyed. A missed workout becomes proof of permanent failure. In all of these situations, the middle ground, the space where balance and progress actually live, is erased. Black and white thinking convinces us that life is all or nothing, but in truth, most of life exists in the in-between. Breaking free begins with awareness. Notice the words always and never. Catch the moments when you hear yourself say, "I always fail," or "I'll never succeed." These are signs you are falling into extremes. Challenge them by asking, "Is this really true?" What's another way of looking at this? Instead of "I failed, so I'm worthless," you might ask, "What did I learn from this setback?" Instead of "My friend doesn't care," you might remind yourself, "Maybe they're dealing with something I don't know about." With practice, these small mental shifts add up. They create space for flexibility, self-compassion, and balance. Life is not black or white. It is textured with grays, filled with nuance, and rich with possibilities that extremes cannot see. The moment you stop forcing everything into rigid categories is the moment you begin to breathe more freely, to accept imperfection, and to grow without fear. Black and white thinking oversimplifies reality, but stepping beyond it allows you to finally live it. Overgeneralization. Overgeneralization is one of the most deceptive traps the human mind falls into. It begins with a single event, a single mistake, or a single rejection, and then stretches far beyond its original scope, convincing us that this one outcome defines every outcome. Instead of seeing an event for what it really is, one moment in time, one piece of a much larger puzzle, the mind insists that it is proof of a permanent truth. You fail one exam, and suddenly you're terrible at school. You get rejected from one job, and suddenly you're unemployable. A single heartbreak convinces you that love will never work out for you. This distortion magnifies the weight of one experience until it crushes the possibilities of the future. What makes overgeneralization so dangerous is its ability to disguise itself as rational thinking. The brain loves patterns. It constantly searches for shortcuts, trying to make sense of the world by connecting dots. That's why, if you trip once, your mind might whisper, "I always embarrass myself." If you face rejection, your mind will say, "It always happens this way." In that moment, you believe you're simply recognizing reality, when in truth, you're creating a false rule that chains you to the past. Overgeneralization transforms "this happened once" into "this will happen every time," leaving no space for growth, change, or second chances. Consider the student who fails one math test. Instead of analyzing what went wrong, maybe they didn't study enough, maybe they misunderstood certain concepts, maybe they just had a bad day. Their mind leaps straight to, "I'm terrible at math." That identity takes root, and with it comes hesitation, self-doubt, and avoidance. They begin to believe improvement is impossible. Over time, this belief becomes self-fulfilling. They stop trying, they avoid challenges, and in doing so, they guarantee the failure they fear. This is the destructive power of overgeneralization. It takes a single data point and turns it into destiny. The same pattern unfolds in relationships. Someone experiences heartbreak and concludes, "I will never find love again." They ignore the countless variables that shape relationships: timing, compatibility, mutual effort, and instead, they carry their pain into the future, using it as evidence that they are doomed. When they meet new people, they hold back, afraid of the inevitable disappointment their mind insists will come. What began as one painful chapter becomes the script for the entire story of their life. This is how overgeneralization poisons hope, quietly robbing people of the courage to try again. Even small social missteps are exaggerated under this distortion. Imagine someone makes an awkward comment during a conversation. Instead of shrugging it off, they obsess over it for days, telling themselves, "I always embarrass myself in social situations." They forget the countless times they spoke confidently, made others laugh, or built genuine connections. Their mind erases all evidence that doesn't fit the rule, leaving only the distorted belief that they are socially incompetent. This narrow lens makes the world feel hostile and unforgiving, when in truth, one awkward moment does not define who they are. Overgeneralization often has roots in childhood or trauma. A child who is constantly criticized might grow up thinking, "I always get things wrong." If they are bullied, they might conclude, "Nobody will ever like me." These early beliefs, once absorbed, shape the way they interpret future experiences. As adults, they carry these old rules into new situations, applying them long after they have ceased to be relevant. The pain of the past colors the canvas of the present, until every disappointment feels like confirmation of an identity that was never true to begin with. This distortion doesn't just affect individuals, it shapes how people see the world. Someone cut off in traffic might decide, "People are so rude these days," as though one driver represents the entire human race. Someone who hears a politician lie might think, "All politicians are corrupt." Instead of analyzing situations individually, the mind collapses them into absolutes. This way of thinking closes doors to nuance, understanding, and dialogue. It makes it easier to stay cynical and harder to see exceptions. Over time, it creates division, mistrust, and disconnection from reality. The trap of overgeneralization also feeds anxiety. A person who gets sick once may think, "I'm always unhealthy." Someone who makes a mistake at work might conclude, "I can't do anything right." These sweeping conclusions fuel fear and hopelessness. Instead of facing challenges with resilience, people avoid risks, withdraw from opportunities, and limit themselves. Their world shrinks because they believe it will only bring more pain. The irony is that in trying to protect themselves from disappointment, they guarantee more of it by refusing to try. Breaking free from overgeneralization requires deliberate practice. The first step is awareness, noticing when words like always, never, or everyone appear in your thoughts. These are red flags. When you catch yourself thinking, I never succeed, pause and ask, is that really true? What about the times I did succeed? Force your mind to bring forth counter evidence. Write it down if you have to. Seeing your successes on paper can dismantle the illusion that failure is your only truth. Another powerful method is reframing. Instead of saying, I failed, so I'm a failure, shift the narrative. I failed this time, but I can learn and try again. Instead of, I'll never be good at this, try, I'm still learning, and progress takes time. These small shifts in language change the way you see yourself. They replace permanence with possibility, turning absolute statements into open-ended ones. Overgeneralization thrives in silence and isolation, so seeking outside perspective also helps. Talk to a trusted friend, mentor, or therapist. Often others can see strengths and successes you've forgotten or ignored. They can remind you that one failure doesn't erase every achievement, and one rejection doesn't cancel your worth. Sometimes, all it takes is hearing someone else say, that's not true, to break the spell of distorted thinking. Ultimately, overcoming overgeneralization is about reclaiming balance. Life is not a straight line of success or failure. It is a tapestry woven with both. Every setback is a single thread, not the entire fabric. Every mistake is a lesson, not a verdict. The more you remind yourself of this truth, the more resilient you become. So the next time your mind insists that one bad moment defines you, pause, step back. Remember that no single event holds the power to tell your whole story. Overgeneralization wants you to believe in absolutes, but your life, your growth, and your future are built in the infinite space between them. Catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is one of the most exhausting distortions the human mind creates. It takes a small problem, a minor setback, or even a simple unknown, and blows it up into the worst possible scenario. The mind convinces you that not only is something bad happening, but that it will snowball into disaster. A headache becomes a brain tumor. A late text reply becomes the end of a relationship. Being late to work becomes the first step toward losing your job and spiraling into ruin. Catastrophizing makes you live inside the what-ifs of fear rather than the reality of the present. At first glance, this pattern might look like overcautious thinking, a kind of preparation for danger, but in reality, catastrophizing is not preparation at all. It is a form of mental sabotage. Instead of making you ready to deal with life's challenges, it overwhelms you with anxiety, paralyzes decision-making, and convinces you that the future is already lost. It creates a cycle where fear feeds fear until the imagined disaster feels more real than reality itself. Consider someone running late for an important meeting. A rational mind might think, I'm late, but I'll apologize when I arrive. A catastrophizing mind, however, leaps into a spiral. My boss will be furious. I'll get a poor review. I might even lose my job. If I lose my job, I won't pay rent. I'll lose my home. I'll disappoint my family. My life will fall apart. Notice how quickly the thought escalates from being a few minutes late to losing everything. Nothing has actually happened, but the person feels the panic as though it already has. Their body responds, heart pounding, shallow breathing, tense muscles, as if the imagined disaster were unfolding right now. Health anxiety provides another example. Someone feels a mild headache. Instead of considering ordinary causes, dehydration, stress, poor sleep, its catastrophizing mind screams, this must be something serious. What if it's a tumor? What if I'm dying? They rush to research symptoms online, where every common ache is connected to something terrifying. By the time they're done scrolling, they're convinced they're terminally ill. The irony is that the stress of catastrophizing often creates more physical tension, worsening the very symptoms that triggered the fear. Relationships also suffer under catastrophizing. Imagine sending a message to a partner or friend and not receiving an immediate reply. A balanced mind might think, they're busy, they'll reply later, but a catastrophizing mind interprets silence as rejection. They're upset with me, maybe they don't love me anymore, maybe they're planning to end things. maybe I'll be alone forever. Without evidence, the mind invents a painful story and reacts to it as if it's already true. This often leads to unnecessary conflict because the catastrophizer begins acting distant, defensive, or needy, which in turn strains the relationship. The origins of catastrophizing often lie in childhood experiences. A child who grew up in an environment where small mistakes led to harsh punishment might have learned to expect the worst. For them, forgetting homework wasn't just a mistake. It meant humiliation, anger, or even physical punishment. Over time, their brain equated small missteps with disaster. That child grows into an adult who reacts the same way. One mistake feels like the end of everything. The nervous system has been trained to treat inconvenience as catastrophe. In today's world, catastrophizing is also reinforced by media and culture. News outlets thrive on worst-case scenarios. Headlines scream danger, crises, and looming disaster. Social media amplifies fear by showcasing the extreme: tragedies, losses, conflicts. When you're constantly exposed to worst-case stories, your brain becomes conditioned to expect them in your own life. Suddenly, a simple headache feels like the headline you read last week. A missed call feels like the story of someone's unexpected heartbreak. Fear becomes the filter through which you interpret reality. The cost of catastrophizing is not just emotional, it's practical. People who catastrophize often avoid taking risks, pursuing opportunities, or embracing challenges. Why try something new if your mind insists it will end in disaster? A person might avoid applying for a new job because they imagine rejection, humiliation, or career failure. They might refuse to speak in public because they're convinced they'll embarrass themselves and be ridiculed forever. In reality, most of these outcomes never happen, but the fear of them is enough to keep people stuck in a smaller, safer, but ultimately unfulfilling life. What makes catastrophizing so convincing is that it feels real. The brain doesn't always distinguish between imagination and reality. When you picture a worst-case scenario vividly, your body reacts as though it's actually happening. Adrenaline surges, your heart races, your breath shortens. This physical reaction reinforces the belief: I feel panicked, so the danger must be real. It's a vicious cycle where thoughts trigger feelings, feelings confirm thoughts, and the imagined disaster grows stronger with every heartbeat. But here's the truth: catastrophizing can be broken. The first step is awareness, catching yourself in the spiral. When you notice your thoughts racing toward disaster, pause and ask, what evidence do I have that this will happen? Has it actually happened before? Are there other explanations I'm ignoring? More often than not, the answers reveal that your fears are not grounded in fact. Another powerful strategy is to deliberately consider alternatives. If your mind screams, "They didn't reply because they hate me," counter it with, "Maybe they're busy, maybe their phone died, maybe they're simply resting." For every catastrophic thought, challenge yourself to create 2 or 3 balanced possibilities. This doesn't mean denying risks. It means refusing to inflate them into inevitabilities. Looking at the past can also help. Many people who catastrophize realize that their worst fears rarely came true. Think about the last time you panicked, convinced disaster was around the corner. Did it actually unfold the way you imagined? Most of the time, the answer is no. Keeping a record of these moments can weaken the brain's habit of leaping to extremes. It builds a body of evidence that life is not as catastrophic as your thoughts claim. Physical practices are equally important. Because catastrophizing activates the body's stress response, calming the body helps calm the mind. Deep breathing, meditation, or even a short walk can interrupt the cycle of panic. When the body relaxes, the brain has space to think more clearly. This is why relaxation techniques aren't just luxuries. They are tools to counter distorted thinking. Limiting exposure to fear-driven media also reduces catastrophizing. If you constantly feed your brain stories of worst-case scenarios, it will replay them in your own life. Set boundaries. Check the news less often. Notice how your anxiety shifts when you choose what information to consume. Sometimes the simplest change, protecting your mental diet, makes the biggest difference. At its core, catastrophizing is about control. The mind leaps to extremes because uncertainty feels unbearable. By imagining the worst, we try to prepare ourselves. But preparation built on fear only steals peace from the present. Real preparation is facing life as it comes, with resilience, not with panic. Breaking free from catastrophizing doesn't mean ignoring risks or pretending everything is fine. It means approaching life with balance. It means accepting that while bad things can happen, they are not inevitable, and they are rarely as devastating as the mind predicts. Every time you catch yourself in a spiral and step back, you weaken the habit. Every time you challenge a catastrophic thought, you reclaim a little more freedom. Life is uncertain, yes, but uncertainty does not equal disaster. And the more you practice seeing that truth, the more you'll realize that most of the catastrophes you feared never existed outside your own imagination. Minimization. Minimization is one of the quietest but most destructive thought patterns a person can carry. Unlike catastrophizing, which inflates problems until they become unbearable, minimization does the opposite. It shrinks reality, belittles achievements, and downplays emotions until nothing seems to matter. It's the voice that whispers, "It's not a big deal," even when it is. It's the habit of brushing off compliments, ignoring accomplishments, dismissing struggles, and invalidating your own pain. At first, minimization might seem like humility, a way of staying grounded, but when it becomes a constant pattern, it erases your value, denies your truth, and convinces you that nothing you do or feel really counts. Think about the person who works long hours on a difficult project. They stay up late, sacrifice weekends, and give their very best. When their efforts are recognized, instead of saying thank you, they shrug it off. Oh, it was nothing. They believe they're being modest, but inside they're training their mind to believe their hard work holds no weight. Over time, this habit eats away at self-worth. Achievements are dismissed, victories are forgotten, and soon, the person begins to believe they have achieved nothing at all. Minimization steals pride and replaces it with emptiness. This distortion doesn't only diminish success, it also diminishes pain. Someone who feels heartbroken, exhausted, or anxious may tell themselves, "I shouldn't feel this way. Other people have it worse." On the surface, it looks like perspective, but in reality, it's self-erasure. It invalidates the very real emotions that deserve acknowledgement. When you tell yourself your struggles are not that bad, you deny your right to feel, to process, and to heal. Pain doesn't vanish just because you minimize it. It burrows deeper, growing heavier with every dismissal until it erupts, as burnout, resentment, or depression. Minimization also creates cracks in relationships. Imagine someone in a partnership who constantly says, "It's fine, I don't mind," even when they do mind. They minimize their discomfort to avoid conflict. They swallow their emotions, thinking silence will keep the peace. But over time, the imbalance grows. The partner who minimizes begins to feel invisible, unappreciated, and unheard. Meanwhile, the other partner may have no idea there's even a problem, because every issue has been dismissed as not important. This dynamic leads to distance, frustration, and unspoken pain, all because one person kept minimizing instead of expressing. Friendships are impacted in a similar way. If a friend constantly makes cutting jokes at your expense, and you tell yourself they don't mean anything by it, you're minimizing harm. Instead of standing up for yourself, you excuse behavior that chips away at your self-esteem. The more you minimize, the more others continue unchecked. Soon, your silence becomes permission, and the pattern deepens. What could have been addressed with a boundary grows into a quiet ache you carry alone. Minimization shows up in the workplace, too. Someone drowning in responsibilities may tell themselves, "It's not that bad. Other people work harder." They minimize their stress, convincing themselves they have no right to complain. So they keep saying yes to every request, piling more on their plate until they collapse under the weight of burnout. By minimizing their limits, they sabotage their own well-being. They become overworked, undervalued, and ultimately resentful. But by then, the habit is so ingrained they barely remember how to speak up. Even health is endangered by minimization. A person who feels unwell might think, "It's nothing serious. I don't want to bother anyone." They ignore symptoms, brushing them aside until a small issue becomes a major problem. Someone struggling with fatigue might say, "I just need to push through," instead of seeking help. Another might dismiss constant headaches as just stress without considering deeper causes. By minimizing their pain, they delay care, making it harder to heal when the problem finally demands attention. Minimization often begins in childhood. If you grew up in an environment where emotions were brushed aside, where sadness was met with "stop crying" or frustration was labeled dramatic, You may have learned to silence yourself. If compliments were rare or downplayed, you may have learned to dismiss your own achievements. These lessons sink deep. They become the script your mind reads whenever you feel pride or pain. Don't make it a big deal. Keep it small. Keep it quiet. And so, as adults, many people minimize without even realizing they're doing it. This pattern can also be a defense mechanism. For some, minimizing pain feels safer than acknowledging it. After all, to admit something hurts is to risk vulnerability, to risk being seen as weak, to risk rejection. By saying, "it's fine," you protect yourself from judgment. But protection has a cost. It walls you off from authentic connection. Others can't comfort you if you never admit you're hurting. They can't celebrate you if you never acknowledge your own wins. In minimizing, you trade truth for safety, but the safety is an illusion, and the cost is your sense of self. Minimization is also tied to self-worth. People who don't believe they deserve attention or care often minimize themselves. They think, "I shouldn't bother anyone. My needs don't matter. My feelings aren't important." In doing so, they reinforce the belief that they are unworthy. They silence themselves before anyone else can, not realizing that this silence becomes their prison. So how do you break free from minimization? The first step is awareness. Notice when you dismiss your feelings, your achievements, or your struggles. Pay attention to the phrases you use. "It was nothing." "I'm overreacting." "It's not a big deal." These are the warning signs. When you catch yourself minimizing, pause. Ask, what if this actually does matter? What if my feelings are valid? What if my effort deserves recognition? Challenge the instinct to shrink yourself. Practice self-validation. If you accomplish something, allow yourself to feel proud. Instead of brushing off praise, accept it with a simple, "Thank you, I worked hard on that." It may feel uncomfortable at first, but with practice you'll retrain your mind to honor your effort. If you feel hurt, remind yourself, "My feelings are valid. I don't need to compare my pain to anyone else's to justify it." Pain does not need to win a contest to be real. Speaking up is another step. If you find yourself saying, "it's fine" in relationships, try being honest about your needs. Start small. Instead of, "I don't mind," say, "Actually, I'd prefer this." Instead of ignoring hurtful behavior, say, "That joke made me uncomfortable." The more you practice, the more you reclaim your voice. Healthy relationships are not built on minimization. They're built on truth, even when truth feels vulnerable. Breaking the habit also requires compassion for yourself. Recognize that minimizing may have protected you once, but it no longer serves you. It was a survival tool, not a reflection of your worth. Now, you can choose a different way, one where you honor your feelings, your achievements, and your needs. Minimization whispers that nothing matters, but the truth is that everything matters. Your joy, your pain, your effort, your growth. Dismissing them doesn't make them disappear. It only makes you invisible to yourself. When you stop minimizing, you start living. You begin to see your victories as real, your struggles as valid, and your presence as important. Because here's the reality. It does matter. You matter. And no amount of minimization will change that truth. Magnification. Magnification is the twin of minimization, but it takes the opposite form. Instead of shrinking things down until they seem like nothing, magnification blows them out of proportion until they seem unbearable. It's the distortion that takes a single mistake, a single flaw, or a single challenge, and inflates it until it consumes your entire perspective. It's the voice that says, "This is the worst thing that could happen," even when it isn't. It's the tendency to zoom in on problems so closely that they block out everything else in sight. Imagine someone giving a presentation at work. They speak for 20 minutes with confidence, clarity, and poise. But in the middle, they stumble over a single word. Instead of recognizing the overall success, they obsess over that stumble. "I messed up. Everyone noticed. I embarrassed myself." The stumble becomes the whole story, magnified beyond its reality. In truth, most people likely forgot it within seconds. But in the mind of the magnifier, that tiny slip eclipses everything else. They walk away feeling like a failure, even though 99% of what they did was excellent. This is the destructive nature of magnification. It zooms in on the flaw until it fills the entire screen. Like a camera lens focused on a single crack in a wall, it makes the crack appear enormous while erasing the structure of the wall itself. Life becomes defined by imperfections, mistakes, and shortcomings, while successes and strengths are blurred into the background. Over time, this way of thinking erodes confidence, self-esteem, and joy. Magnification is not just about mistakes, it also applies to fears. A person waiting for medical test results may focus on the smallest symptom, in a twinge of pain, a moment of fatigue, and blow it into catastrophic proportions. This must mean the worst. This must mean something serious, they magnify the possibility of danger while ignoring all the evidence that points toward normalcy. The fear grows, dominating their thoughts, until they are living in the shadow of an illness that may not even exist. In relationships, magnification often shows up in arguments. One harsh word, one misunderstanding, one careless mistake, and suddenly the entire relationship feels broken. The magnifier fixates on the flaw, replaying it in their mind until it feels enormous. They forget the years of kindness, the moments of love, the countless examples of care. The one negative moment swells until it overshadows everything else. This creates unnecessary conflict because the magnified flaw becomes the only thing they see. Magnification also appears in self-image. Someone may look in the mirror and focus on one feature they dislike, a scar, a wrinkle, a few extra pounds. Instead of seeing themselves as a whole person, they magnify that one feature until it feels like their entire identity. They convince themselves that others only see the flaw, that it defines them completely. This distorted focus destroys confidence and creates insecurity, even when others don't notice the so-called flaw at all. The roots of magnification often lie in perfectionism. People who hold themselves to impossible standards magnify every deviation from perfection. A single error feels unacceptable. A single weakness feels catastrophic. Magnification also grows from environments where mistakes were punished harshly. If a child was scolded or shamed for small errors, they may grow into adults who magnify every flaw because they learn to expect outsized consequences. Their nervous system equates mistakes with danger, so even small slip-ups feel like threats to survival. Social and cultural influences also feed magnification. In a world where achievements are constantly compared and highlighted, people may magnify their own shortcomings to match the impossible standards they see online. Someone scrolling through social media might magnify their own failures, thinking, everyone else is successful and I'm falling behind. In truth, they're comparing their entire reality to someone else's highlight reel. But the magnification doesn't care about truth. It cares about focus. And wherever focus goes, perspective follows. The costs of magnification are enormous. People who magnify problems often become paralyzed by them. A student who magnifies one bad grade may convince themselves they're failing, so they stop trying altogether. A professional who magnifies one mistake may lose confidence, so they avoid taking risks or pursuing opportunities. In relationships, magnification leads to unnecessary breakups, constant insecurity, and cycles of conflict. In mental health, it feeds anxiety and depression, because every problem feels overwhelming, every flaw feels defining, and every challenge feels impossible. What makes magnification so tricky is that it feels convincing. When you're caught in it, the flaw really does look enormous. The problem really does feel insurmountable. The mistake really does feel defining. That's why breaking free requires deliberately widening the lens. Instead of zooming in on the flaw, you have to step back and see the whole picture. The first step is awareness. Notice when your mind fixates on one detail and blows it out of proportion. Pay attention to the language you use. This is terrible. This ruins everything. I can't handle this. These are signs that magnification is at work. When you catch yourself, pause, and ask, is this really as big as it feels? What am I ignoring by focusing only on this? Often the act of questioning weakens the distortion. Another powerful technique is perspective taking. Imagine advising a friend in the same situation. Would you magnify their mistake the way you magnify your own? Probably not. You'd remind them of their strengths, their successes, and the bigger picture. Applying that same compassion to yourself can shift the focus away from the flaw. Gratitude and balanced reflection also counter magnification. When you notice a flaw, deliberately list the positives that surround it. If you stumble in a presentation, remind yourself of the parts that went well. If you argue with a partner, recall the many moments of love that still define the relationship. By widening the lens, you place the flaw in its true context. Mindfulness practices can help too. When magnification strikes, the body often reacts with stress, racing thoughts, shallow breathing, tense muscles. These physical reactions reinforce the belief that the problem is huge. Slowing down the body through breathing, meditation, or grounding techniques interrupts the cycle. It creates space for the mind to recalibrate and see the situation with greater balance. Magnification is not about the size of the problem, it's about the size of the focus. The more you fixate, the larger it grows. But when you shift your attention, the distortion weakens. Over time, you learn to hold flaws and mistakes in proportion, recognizing them as part of the whole, but not the whole itself. Life is not defined by the cracks in the wall, but by the strength of the structure. Mistakes are real, yes. Problems are real, yes. But they are not everything. Magnification convinces you that they are, but the truth is that they are only a piece of the story. And when you choose to see the bigger picture, you reclaim the power that magnification tries to steal. Mind reading. Mind reading is one of the most deceptive cognitive distortions because it feels like intuition, but in reality, it is assumption dressed up as certainty. It happens when we convince ourselves that we know what other people are thinking, and not just know, but know with complete conviction. The trouble is, we're almost always wrong. We assume their silence means disapproval. We believe their facial expression is a judgment. We interpret their lack of response as rejection. And even when no evidence exists, we fill in the blanks with our fears, anxieties, and insecurities until our imagined version of their thoughts becomes more real to us than anything they've actually said. At first glance, mind reading seems harmless. After all, don't we all make guesses about what others are thinking? Isn't empathy, in a way, a form of reading minds? The difference is that empathy is based on listening, observing, and connecting with another person's reality, while mind reading skips all of that. It doesn't ask questions, it doesn't clarify, it doesn't wait for truth. It assumes, projects, and concludes. And the conclusions it draws are almost always negative because they are filtered through our own insecurities. Imagine sending a text to a friend, only to receive no reply for hours. A balanced mind might think, they're busy, they'll respond later. A mind trapped in this distortion leaps into paranoia. They must be ignoring me. Did I say something wrong? Maybe they don't like me anymore. Maybe our friendship is falling apart. Hours of spiraling pass, filled with imaginary scenarios that feel real. When the friend finally replies with a simple, "Sorry, I was working all day," the catastrophes vanish, but the emotional toll remains. You've just lived through a painful drama that never existed. Relationships often suffer most from mind reading. A partner who says GHS after a long day may be interpreted as, "They're disappointed in me." A simple glance may be twisted into, "They're annoyed with me." A forgotten task may be magnified into, "They think I'm incompetent." Instead of asking, "What's wrong?" or "How are you feeling?" the mind leaps to assumptions and builds stories around them. These stories shape how we treat the other person. Defensive, withdrawn, apologetic, and ironically, those reactions can create tension where none originally existed. The relationship begins to strain, not because of what the other person thought, but because of what we assume they thought. Mind reading also thrives in professional settings. Picture someone presenting an idea in a meeting. As they speak, a colleague looks at their phone. Instantly, the speaker assumes, "They're bored, they think I'm stupid." Another colleague frowns, and suddenly, "They hate my idea. I'm embarrassing myself." These conclusions are based not on facts, but on interpretations. Maybe the first colleague just received an urgent message. Maybe the second was frowning at their own thoughts. But the mind reader never considers alternatives. They accept their assumption as truth and carry the weight of unnecessary self-doubt. The origins of mind reading often lie in fear of rejection. People who crave acceptance, who fear disapproval, or who have been criticized in the past may become hyper-alert to others' reactions. They scan faces, tones, and silences for hidden meanings, believing they can preempt rejection by predicting it. But instead of protecting themselves, they imprison themselves in anxiety. They misinterpret neutral signals as negative ones and sabotage their own sense of belonging. Childhood experiences often reinforce this distortion. A child growing up in a household where parents were unpredictable, loving one moment, critical the next, learns to read the room for safety. They study facial expressions, tones, and silences, trying to predict the storm before it comes. As adults, they carry this survival strategy into every interaction. But what once protected them now distorts reality. They're no longer children needing to decode danger, but their mind still insists that every sigh, every glance, every silence must be interpreted. The cultural environment also plays a role. In a world saturated with social media, where likes, comments, and responses are treated as proof of worth, silence becomes terrifying. If a post goes unnoticed, the mind jumps to conclusions. People don't care. They think I'm irrelevant. I must not matter. The absence of feedback is interpreted as rejection, when in truth, it's often nothing more than timing, algorithms, or simple inattention. But mind reading rarely leaves space for neutrality. It always fills the void with fear. The cost of mind reading is immense. It drains emotional energy, destroys confidence, and poisons relationships. People who constantly assume what others think end up living in fear of judgments that may not exist. They stop speaking up in meetings, stop taking risks, stop being authentic, because they're convinced others are scrutinizing and condemning them. Their world becomes smaller, limited not by reality, but by imagined disapproval. The irony is that mind reading often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you assume someone thinks poorly of you, you act differently toward them, guarded, distant, defensive. They sense that shift and may, in turn, respond with distance or confusion. The relationship suffers, and suddenly your assumption feels proven, but it was your reaction to the false belief that created the outcome, not their original thought. In this way, mind reading creates the very rejection it fears. So, how do we break free from this distortion? The first step is radical humility, admitting that you do not know what another person is thinking. No matter how much you analyze, guess, or interpret, their thoughts are not accessible to you. You cannot see inside their mind. Accepting this truth creates space for healthier alternatives. The second step is curiosity. Instead of assuming, ask. Instead of filling silence with stories, seek clarification. If a friend is quiet, ask how they're doing. If a partner seems distant, share what you've noticed and invite them to explain. If a colleague frowns, resist the urge to interpret and instead check in. These conversations often reveal that what you imagined has little to do with reality. Another tool is to challenge the assumptions directly. When you catch yourself thinking, "They must think I'm stupid," pause and ask, "What evidence do I have for this? What are other possible explanations?" Write down multiple alternatives. Often you'll realize that your assumption is only one possibility among many, and usually not the most likely one. Mindfulness also helps. Because mind reading thrives on anxiety, calming the body helps interrupt the cycle. When you notice yourself spiraling into assumptions, take a breath, ground yourself in the present moment, and remind yourself, this is a thought, not a fact. By separating feelings from truth, you weaken the distortion's grip. Finally, building self-worth reduces the pull of mind reading. The less dependent you are on others' approval, the less desperate you become to predict their thoughts. When you know your value, you don't need to scan every glance or silence for hidden meaning. You can let people have their thoughts without letting them define you. Mind reading is seductive because it gives the illusion of control, as if by predicting what others think, you can protect yourself from rejection. But the reality is that it creates more pain than protection. It replaces connection with assumption, replaces curiosity with fear, and replaces truth with distortion. Breaking free means living in reality, not imagination. It means allowing others to speak for themselves, allowing silence to simply be silence, and allowing yourself the freedom to not carry the weight of every possible judgment. When you stop trying to read minds, you begin to see more clearly, and in that clarity, relationships deepen, anxiety lessens, and life becomes lighter. Because here's the truth, you don't know what they're thinking, and you don't need to. Emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is one of the most seductive traps the mind creates, because it convinces us that feelings are facts. It's the distortion that whispers, if I feel it, it must be true. When we fall into this pattern, our emotions don't just influence our perception of reality, they become reality. Feeling anxious suddenly means the world is dangerous. Feeling sad means life is hopeless. Feeling insecure means we are unworthy. Instead of recognizing emotions as temporary inner experiences, we treat them as evidence of external truth. This distortion is powerful because emotions are powerful. They are meant to guide us, alert us, and connect us to our environment. But when emotions overtake logic, we begin to misinterpret them as proof. If you wake up in a low mood, you may convince yourself that your entire day is ruined. If you feel nervous about a project, you may assume you are doomed to fail. Emotional reasoning turns the internal weather of your mind into the climate of your entire life. Imagine someone preparing for a job interview. They feel anxious, their stomach tightens, their hands sweat. Instead of saying, "I'm nervous because this matters to me," they tell themselves, "I feel nervous. That must mean I'm not prepared. I'm going to fail." The anxiety is interpreted as evidence of incompetence, when in fact, it's only evidence that they care. Emotional reasoning makes the emotion itself the proof. Even when no objective evidence exists, relationships often suffer the most under this distortion. A partner may feel insecure and conclude, "I feel unloved, therefore my partner must not love me." Instead of checking reality, noticing acts of care, remembering words of affection, or asking for reassurance, the feeling becomes the truth. Another person may feel jealous and assume, "If I feel threatened, it must mean my partner is unfaithful." The roots of emotional reasoning often stretch back to childhood. Children are not naturally taught to separate emotions from facts. If a child feels scared, they believe there must be a monster. If they feel unloved, they conclude they are unloved. Without guidance, those beliefs solidify into habits of thought, carried into adulthood. Some children also grow up in environments where feelings were ignored or dismissed, forcing them to rely solely on their own interpretations. Others grew up in chaos, where emotions truly did signal danger, teaching them to trust feelings above all else. As adults, these habits persist, even when they no longer serve reality. Our culture also reinforces emotional reasoning. Phrases like "trust your feelings" and "go with your gut" suggest that emotions are always the best guide. While feelings can indeed provide valuable insight, they are not infallible. Emotions are shaped by stress, trauma, hormones, lack of sleep, even what we ate for breakfast. To treat them as absolute truth is to hand over our lives to forces that shift constantly. The cost of emotional reasoning is enormous. It keeps people trapped in cycles of self-doubt, fear, and avoidance. Someone who feels insecure may avoid pursuing dreams because they assume their feelings of inadequacy reflect their actual ability. Someone who feels anxious in social settings may withdraw, believing the discomfort means they don't belong. Someone who feels unattractive may avoid relationships altogether, convinced their feelings reveal objective reality. In each case, a temporary inner state dictates long-term choices, shrinking the person's world and reinforcing their pain. But here's the truth. Emotions are real, but they are not facts. Feeling worthless doesn't mean you are worthless. Feeling anxious doesn't mean danger is near. Feeling sad doesn't mean joy is gone forever. Emotions deserve recognition, but they do not deserve to dictate reality. Breaking free from emotional reasoning begins with learning to pause. When a strong emotion hits, ask yourself, what evidence do I have that this feeling reflects truth? Am I treating an emotion as fact? By questioning the automatic leap from feeling to reality, you begin to reclaim power from the distortion. Another powerful tool is naming emotions. Instead of saying, "I am worthless," say, "I am feeling worthless right now." That small shift separates identity from emotion. It reminds you that feelings are states that pass, not permanent truths. Similarly, changing "I am scared, therefore I'm in danger" to "I am feeling scared, but that doesn't mean I'm unsafe" can shift the way you respond. Language creates distance between you and the emotion, making it easier to evaluate. Mindfulness practices also weaken emotional reasoning. By sitting with emotions, noticing them without judgment, observing them as passing experiences, you learn that feelings rise and fall like waves. They feel overwhelming in the moment, but they always change. Recognizing their impermanence helps you resist treating them as eternal truths. Cognitive reframing is another strategy. If you feel anxious before a presentation, instead of assuming, "I feel nervous, so I'll fail," reframe it as, "I feel nervous because this matters to me. Nerves mean I care. They don't predict failure." By assigning new meaning to the feeling, you change its power. Journaling can also be a powerful tool. Writing down emotions and then listing evidence for and against their truth trains the brain to separate feelings from facts. Over time, this practice weakens the automatic connection between emotion and reality, creating space for more balanced thinking. Ultimately, overcoming emotional reasoning is not about denying emotions, but about putting them in their proper place. Emotions are data, not definitions. They are signals, not verdicts. They tell us something about our inner world, but they do not define the outer one. When you learn to see emotions as experiences rather than truths, you gain freedom. You can feel fear and still take action. You can feel sadness and still believe in hope. You can feel doubt and still step forward into growth. Life becomes less about reacting to every inner storm and more about steering your ship with awareness, balance, and strength. Because the truth is this: feelings are powerful, but they are not facts. And the moment you stop letting emotions dictate reality is the moment you begin to live in reality, not just in the shadows of your mind. Selective abstraction, mental filtering. Selective abstraction, also called mental filtering, is the distortion of focusing on one negative detail while ignoring the bigger picture. It's as if the mind wears dark glasses, filtering out everything positive and letting only the negative come through. No matter how much good surrounds you, the single flaw, the single mistake, or the single criticism becomes all you see. It's like staring at a single speck on a glass window and convincing yourself the whole view is ruined. Think about a student who receives feedback on an essay. The teacher writes 10 positive comments praising creativity, clarity, and strong arguments, but includes one note about grammar mistakes. The student doesn't remember the praise. They obsess over the criticism. "I'm terrible at writing," they conclude, completely ignoring the evidence of their strengths. That one negative comment outweighs everything else, not because it's objectively more important, but because selective abstraction has made it the only thing visible. This pattern appears everywhere. Imagine someone attending a social gathering where most interactions are friendly and warm, but one person seems distracted and gives a lukewarm response. Instead of remembering the laughter, the smiles, and the conversations that went well, the person fixates on the one moment of awkwardness. They leave the event replaying that single interaction, convinced they embarrassed themselves or that nobody really likes them. Selective abstraction has filtered out all the positive signals and left only the negative, distorting reality into a story of failure. Work environments amplify this distortion too. Picture someone who successfully completes 20 tasks in a week but makes a small mistake on one report. Instead of recognizing the ratio of success to error, they obsess over the mistake. "I always messed up. I can't do anything right." The truth, that they handled almost everything effectively, is erased. Only the flaw remains. Over time, this distortion can lead to burnout, because the person never allows themselves to feel competent, no matter how much they accomplish. Relationships are also deeply impacted. A partner might forget one small detail, like leaving the dishes undone, while remembering countless acts of love, support, and effort. But selective abstraction zooms in on the undone task. "They don't care about me. They're inconsiderate." The bigger reality, that they show love in countless ways, gets pushed aside. Over time, this filtering creates resentment and unfair judgments, damaging bonds that are actually strong. Selective abstraction often develops from environments where criticism was louder than praise. If a child grew up with parents or teachers who focused on mistakes rather than achievements, their brain may have been trained to do the same. A child who brings home a report card filled with A's but receives scolding for the one B learns to focus on shortcomings. That child grows into an adult who cannot enjoy their own accomplishments because their mental filter is tuned to catch flaws and ignore strengths. The distortion also feeds anxiety and depression. When someone filters out the positives, their world becomes darker than it truly is. A depressed person might wake up and think, "I'm useless," because they only notice the times they struggled, forgetting all the times they succeeded. An anxious person may dwell only on mistakes or potential dangers, ignoring all the evidence of safety and competence. Selective abstraction creates a mental highlight reel of the worst moments, played on repeat while muting the rest of life. The danger of mental filtering is not just emotional, but also practical. When you filter reality, your decisions are based on incomplete data. A student who filters out their strengths may avoid pursuing higher education. An employee who filters out praise may stop going for promotions. A person who filters out affection may sabotage relationships, convinced they are unloved. By focusing only on the flaws, they miss opportunities, growth, and connection. Breaking free begins with awareness. The first step is catching the filter in action. Notice when your mind dismisses compliments, ignores successes, or dwells on the single negative. For example, when you think, "I ruined everything," pause and ask, "Did I really ruin everything, or am I focusing on one part?" Often you'll realize the flaw is only one detail among many. Another strategy is deliberately broadening focus. When you catch yourself obsessing over a negative, list at least 3 positives from the same situation. If you think, "I embarrassed myself at that party," counter it with, "I made 2 people laugh. I had a great conversation with someone. I was invited because people value me." By forcing your mind to see the whole picture, you weaken the filter. Gratitude practices are powerful for this distortion. By writing down daily positives, you retrain your brain to notice what it has been ignoring. Over time, the filter shifts. Instead of only catching flaws, it begins to catch strengths, joys, and blessings. This doesn't erase problems. It balances them. Perspective taking also helps. Imagine a friend telling you about their mistake, but ignoring all their successes. Would you focus on their flaw, or remind them of the bigger picture? Most likely you'd tell them to stop being so hard on themselves. Applying that same compassion inward helps dismantle the distortion. Mindfulness can also shift selective abstraction. By grounding yourself in the present, you begin to notice the full reality instead of narrowing your focus. If you're walking outside, instead of replaying the one negative comment from your day, pay attention to the sun, the air, the colors around you. Expanding awareness to the moment helps loosen the grip of the mental filter. Ultimately, selective abstraction is a form of self-betrayal. It robs you of joy, pride, and balance by convincing you that one flaw cancels out everything else. But life is not defined by one detail. Just as a painting is not ruined by one brushstroke, your worth is not erased by one mistake. The bigger picture always exists, but you must choose to see it. The key truth is this: your mind may filter reality, but reality itself is always bigger. For every flaw, there are strengths. For every mistake, there are lessons. For every criticism, there is praise. The filter doesn't reflect reality. It only reflects your focus. And when you shift focus, you reclaim reality. So the next time your mind zooms in on one negative detail, step back, widen the frame, see the whole picture, because you are always more than your mistakes, and life is always more than its flaws. Personalization is one of the most exhausting cognitive distortions, because it makes you believe that everything is about you. Every bad outcome, every tension in the room, every silence, every mistake. It convinces you that you are the cause of things you didn't cause, the reason for things you had no control over, the weight behind problems that were never yours to carry. At its core, personalization is about over-responsibility. It makes you the center of every negative situation, not in a way that feeds your ego, but in a way that crushes your spirit. Imagine this: 2 friends cancel plans. Instead of thinking, "They must be tired," or "Something must have come up," personalization whispers, "It's because of me. They don't enjoy my company. I must have done something wrong." Even though countless possible reasons exist, the person assumes guilt. The canceled plan becomes a reflection of their worth, their failure, their inadequacy. This is how personalization works. It twists neutral or unrelated events into evidence that you are at fault. This distortion shows up strongly in workplaces. A boss seems stressed in a meeting, speaking in a curt tone. Instead of recognizing that the boss may be dealing with their own pressure, the employee personalizes the behavior. "They're angry with me. I must have done something wrong. My job is in danger." The person leaves the meeting weighed down with shame and anxiety, even though the boss's mood had nothing to do with them. In this way, personalization turns unrelated moods and events into heavy burdens carried unnecessarily. Parenting often amplifies this distortion. A child struggles in school, and the parent immediately blames themselves. "I failed them. I didn't teach them enough. Their mistakes reflect my failures." While parental influence is real, personalization exaggerates it until parents take full, ownership of outcomes that depend on countless factors beyond their control. Teachers, peers, personality, environment. All of these shape a child's experience. But personalization shrinks the complexity down to one false conclusion. It's all my fault. Relationships also suffer when personalization takes root. A partner who is quiet after a stressful day may be met with, "Are you upset with me? Did I do something wrong?" Instead of allowing space for the other person's separate experiences, personalization pulls everything inward. It erases the possibility that their emotions might have nothing to do with you. Over time, this can suffocate relationships because the person who personalizes constantly interprets neutral behavior as criticism or rejection. The partner then feels pressured to over-explain, reassure, or walk on eggshells, leading to frustration on both sides. One of the cruelest effects of personalization is how it deepens guilt. Imagine someone whose friend is going through a hard time. Instead of recognizing the complexity of the friend's struggles, the person thinks, "I should have been there more. This is happening because I failed them." Even tragedies outside of anyone's control, illness, accidents, loss, are absorbed as personal responsibility. If only I had done something differently. The person carries guilt for things they never caused, as though the universe depends on their actions. The roots of personalization often lie in childhood environments where responsibility was unfairly placed on the child. A child of divorce may believe, "It's my fault my parents split." A child raised in chaos may believe, "If I behave perfectly, I can keep everyone happy." These beliefs become lifelong habits. The child grows into an adult who takes responsibility for everyone's emotions, everyone's choice, and everyone's happiness, even when it's impossible. What began as survival becomes distortion, and the weight of the world rests unnecessarily on their shoulders. Personalization also connects with control. For some, it feels safer to believe "it's my fault" than to face the truth that life is unpredictable. Blaming yourself gives the illusion of power. If it's my fault, then maybe I can fix it. But in reality, that illusion only leads to constant self-punishment. Instead of accepting that not everything is within their control, the person convinces themselves they should have controlled it, and that failure to do so means they are defective. The cost of personalization is enormous. It creates chronic anxiety because you are always scanning for ways you might be at fault. It creates guilt because you carry responsibility for things that don't belong to you. It erodes confidence because every problem in your environment feels like proof that you failed. And it damages relationships because you can't fully connect with others when you are constantly filtering their actions through your own insecurities. The worst part is how personalization blinds you to reality. By making everything about you, it actually ignores the truth about others. Your friend cancels because they are exhausted. Your partner is quiet because they're processing stress at work. Your colleague frowns because of something in their own life. But personalization erases their agency, their complexity, their independence, and reduces their entire experience to your imagined role in it. This isn't just self-destructive, it's also unfair to others. So, how do you break free? The first step is awareness, catching yourself in the act of taking blame where it doesn't belong. Pay attention to phrases like, "It must be because of me," or "I should have done something." These are red flags of personalization. When you notice them, pause and ask, what else could explain this? Is it possible this has nothing to do with me? Opening space for alternative explanations, kens the distortion. The second step is perspective. Remind yourself that every person has their own world of emotions, responsibilities, and struggles. Their silence, stress, or mistakes belong to them, not you. You are not responsible for controlling their experience. This perspective frees you from carrying burdens that were never yours. Another powerful tool is self-compassion. When you catch yourself taking blame, remind yourself gently, "I am not responsible for everything. I cannot control everything. I am allowed to exist without owning the entire world." Self-compassion softens the harshness of over-responsibility and reminds you that you too deserve understanding. Setting boundaries also helps. If you find yourself absorbing responsibility in relationships, practice letting others own their emotions. When someone is upset, resist the urge to immediately think, "What did I do wrong?" Instead, ask them directly, "Is something bothering you?" If they say no, take them at their word. Allow them the dignity of owning their own feelings. Finally, practice releasing guilt for things outside your control. Write down situations where you blamed yourself and list all the factors that influenced them. Seeing the complexity on paper makes it harder to sustain the belief that it was all your fault. Over time, this breaks the habit of assuming responsibility for everything. Personalization convinces you that you are the cause of every storm, but the truth is that life has countless moving parts beyond your control. You are a participant in the world, not the sole director of it. By releasing the burden of false responsibility, you free yourself to live with balance, clarity, and peace. Because here's the truth, not everything is about you, and that's not a rejection, it's a relief. Self-blame. Self-blame is one of the heaviest distortions a human mind can carry. It convinces you that whenever something goes wrong, no matter how many factors are at play, no matter how much was out of your control, the fault lies squarely with you. It is the voice that whispers, "If only I had done better. If only I had said something different. If only I had been stronger." It takes the weight of the world and places it on your shoulders, even when that weight was never yours to bear. Unlike accountability, which is healthy and necessary for growth, self-blame is distorted responsibility. Accountability looks at facts. I made a mistake, I can correct it, I can grow. Self-blame, however, ignores nuance. It expands guilt far beyond what is accurate. It paints every failure, every problem, every hardship as proof that you are defective, unworthy, or broken. Instead of learning from mistakes, you punish yourself endlessly for them. Consider a child who grows up in a home marked by conflict. The parents argue, tensions run high, maybe even a divorce occurs. The child, unable to comprehend the complexities of adult relationships, thinks, "This must be my fault. If I had behaved better, if I had made them happier, maybe this wouldn't have happened." That belief sinks deep into the subconscious, shaping the child into an adult who continues to carry responsibility for things they never caused. This is the seed of self-blame, the belief that you are the problem. Even in adulthood, the pattern continues. If a relationship ends, the self-blaming mind doesn't see incompatibility, timing, or mutual responsibility. It sees only personal failure. I wasn't enough. I drove them away. I ruined everything. If a team project at work struggles, the self-blaming person doesn't recognize that others also contributed to mistakes. They internalize the failure as their own. It's because I didn't do enough. Even when a tragedy strikes, an accident, an illness, a loss far outside their control, self-blame whispers, "Maybe I could have prevented this. Maybe this happened because of me." The cruelty of self-blame lies in how it erases complexity. Life is never shaped by one single cause. Every event is the result of countless variables: timing, circumstances, other people's choices, environment, chance. But self-blame filters all of that out and leaves only one conclusion. It's me. It's always me. This distortion blinds you to reality, creating a world where you are always at fault and never enough. The emotional cost is immense. Self-blame breeds guilt, shame, and despair. It convinces you that you don't deserve forgiveness, success, or happiness. It keeps you stuck in cycles of regret, replaying past events endlessly, searching for what you should have done differently. But no matter how many times you replay the story, the conclusion is always the same. I failed. I am to blame. This is why self-blame feels like a prison. It keeps you locked inside a narrative of guilt with no door to escape. This distortion is often reinforced by trauma. Survivors of abuse, for example, frequently internalize blame. A child who is mistreated may conclude, "If I were better, this wouldn't happen to me." This false belief is actually a survival strategy. For a child, it feels safer to think, "I caused this," than to face the terrifying truth that the world is unsafe and uncontrollable. But as that child grows, the strategy becomes poison. They carry the belief into adulthood, blaming themselves for pain inflicted by others. Cultural and social messages can also feed self-blame. Many societies value stoicism, sacrifice, and responsibility. While these values can be noble, they sometimes turn toxic, teaching people that taking responsibility for everything is virtuous. In truth, over-responsibility is destructive. It erases the boundaries between what is yours to carry and what belongs to others. It teaches you to apologize for things that aren't your fault, to absorb guilt that doesn't belong to you, and to sacrifice yourself in the name of false responsibility. The tragedy of self-blame is that it creates learned helplessness. If you believe you are always at fault, you stop seeing solutions. You stop trying to change situations because you believe change is impossible. You stop defending yourself because you believe punishment is deserved. Self-blame convinces you that you are not a participant in life but its permanent failure. And once you believe that, every setback feels like confirmation. Every mistake feels like destiny. So how do you break free from self-blame? The first step is awareness. Notice the language you use with yourself. Do you often think, "It's my fault, I should have done more, I ruined everything"? These phrases are signs of the distortion. When you catch them, pause. Ask yourself, what other factors contributed to this? Was this truly within my control? Often the honest answer reveals that the situation was far more complex than your self-blaming mind allows. The second step is balance. Accountability is not the enemy. Distorted responsibility is. Learn to distinguish between what is yours and what is not. If you made a mistake, acknowledge it and commit to growth. But if you're blaming yourself for someone else's choices, for unpredictable events, or for things beyond your influence, practice releasing it. You are not responsible for everything that happens. Carrying false blame doesn't make you strong. It makes you broken under a weight that isn't yours. Another tool is self-compassion. Speak to yourself the way you would speak to a friend. If your friend said, "My parents divorced because of me," would you agree? No. You'd remind them of the truth. Children do not cause adult choices. If your friend said, "My partner left because I'm worthless," you'd remind them that relationships are complex and worth is not measured by one breakup. That same compassion, turned inward, begins to dismantle the harshness of self-blame. Therapeutic practices can also help. Cognitive reframing challenges the distortion by teaching you to examine evidence. Journaling about events and listing all contributing factors shows you the truth that life is never one person's fault alone. Trauma-informed therapy helps release childhood beliefs that taught you to carry blame for things beyond your control. These practices don't erase responsibility where it's real. They restore balance where it was distorted. Forgiveness is another step, not just of others, but of yourself. Many people who struggle with self-blame hold themselves hostage to the past. They believe they must carry guilt forever as punishment. But forgiveness is not about excusing mistakes. It is about releasing yourself from endless suffering. You cannot grow while chained to the past. You cannot heal while insisting you must be punished. Self-forgiveness is an act of courage, a declaration that you are human, not perfect, and that being human is enough. Ultimately, breaking free from self-blame requires embracing truth. Life is not entirely in your control. Others make choices, accidents happen, circumstances shift. You influence life, but you do not command it. To blame yourself for everything is to live in delusion. To accept the limits of your responsibility is to step into reality. Self-blame shrinks you into the role of permanent culprit, but you are not always guilty. You are not the cause of every storm. You are not responsible for every heartbreak. And you are not required to punish yourself for simply being human. Because here's the reality. You are allowed to learn without self-condemnation, to fail without permanent shame, to exist without carrying the world's weight on your shoulders. You are not always to blame, and the day you truly believe that is the day you set yourself free. Blaming others. If self-blame is the distortion of carrying too much responsibility, then blaming others is its mirror image, the distortion of carrying none. It is the tendency to place all fault, all mistakes, all failures on those around you, while refusing to examine your own role in events. On the surface, blaming others feels like protection. It shields you from guilt, from discomfort, from the pain of acknowledging mistakes. But in reality, it traps you in stagnation. When every problem is someone else's fault, you give up your own power to change, to grow, and to take control of your life. Blaming others begins subtly. Imagine someone running late for work. Instead of admitting they overslept, they immediately blame traffic, their partner for making them late, or the alarm clock for not working properly. In that moment, they've shifted all responsibility outward. The truth is inconvenient, so they bury it beneath excuses. The distortion grows stronger with each repetition, until it becomes automatic. Every disappointment, every failure, every obstacle is someone else's doing. In relationships, blaming others can become poison. A person who struggles to manage their temper might say, "I only yelled because you provoked me." A partner who forgets an anniversary might argue, "Well, you should have reminded me." Instead of recognizing their choices, they turn the spotlight outward, making the other person carry the weight of their mistakes. Over time, this creates resentment, because the partner on the receiving end is forced to absorb blame that isn't theirs. The relationship becomes a battlefield of finger-pointing rather than a partnership of accountability. This distortion also thrives in workplaces. An employee misses a deadline, but insists it was because of poor communication from the team. A manager fails to lead effectively, but blames their staff for underperforming. Each time blame is shifted outward, the possibility of growth disappears. The person never examines what they could do differently, never learns from their mistakes, and therefore, never improves. Blaming others becomes not only a distortion, but a self-sabotaging cycle of stagnation. The deeper danger of blaming others is that it creates a victim mentality. If everything bad in life is someone else's fault, then you are always the victim of circumstance. You lose your sense of agency. You convince yourself you are powerless, constantly at the mercy of others' choices. And while this perspective may feel comforting because it removes guilt, it is ultimately disempowering. If others are to blame for your life, then only others can change it. You hand over your control without even realizing it. The roots of blaming others often go back to childhood environments where accountability was unsafe. A child who was harshly punished for mistakes may have learned to deflect responsibility as a survival strategy. If admitting fault led to humiliation or pain, then blaming others became a shield. That shield, carried into adulthood, turns into a distortion. Instead of protecting, it prevents growth. Instead of keeping you safe, it keeps you stuck. Cultural influences also play a role. Many societies encourage competition and comparison. In environments where being wrong is seen as weakness, people quickly learn to protect their image by pointing outward. Admitting fault feels like losing, so blame becomes a weapon. But the weapon cuts both ways. It may protect pride in the short term, but it destroys trust, connection, and integrity in the long run. Blaming others also creates cycles of conflict. In families, it can pass from one generation to the next. A parent who refuses to take responsibility teaches their children the same pattern. Those children grow up deflecting blame, damaging their own relationships. Blame becomes a legacy, repeating itself until someone has the courage to break it. The cost of this distortion is not just external, but internal. On the outside, blame pushes people away. On the inside, it corrodes your sense of self. Deep down, most people who constantly blame others know they are avoiding their own reflection. They feel the unease of unacknowledged responsibility, the nagging awareness that growth is being avoided. This inner tension often shows up as anger, defensiveness, or bitterness. Blaming others may silence guilt for a moment, but it cannot silence the truth forever. So how do you break free from this cycle? The first step is honesty. Radical honesty with yourself. Notice when your instinct is to immediately point outward. Pause and ask, what was my role in this? Could I have done something differently? The answers may sting, but they also empower. Responsibility is not a punishment, it is a path to growth. The second step is balance. Just as self-blame takes too much responsibility, blaming others takes too little. The truth usually lies in between. Most situations involve a mix of factors, your choices, others' actions, and circumstances beyond anyone's control. Recognizing this balance brings clarity. It allows you to see your role without exaggeration and to see others' roles without denial. Another tool is vulnerability. Admitting mistakes requires courage. It means saying, "I was wrong," or "I could have handled that better." But vulnerability builds trust. In relationships, it transforms conflict into connection. In workplaces, it builds respect. People are more willing to forgive mistakes when they see honesty, but they resent constant blame shifting. Vulnerability, though difficult, opens the door to stronger bonds and deeper growth. Reflection practices can also help dismantle this distortion. Journaling about events and explicitly listing what was in your control and what wasn't creates a habit of balance. Over time, the act of writing reveals patterns. You begin to see when you've unfairly pushed blame outward and when you've avoided responsibility. This awareness makes it harder to keep repeating the distortion unconsciously. Perhaps the most liberating shift is reframing responsibility itself. Many people fear it because they equate it with punishment. But responsibility is not about shame, it's about power. When you accept your role in something, you reclaim your ability to change it. Blaming others may feel easier in the moment, but it leaves you powerless. Responsibility may feel heavier, but it gives you control. It allows you to shape your life instead of waiting for others to change it for you. Ultimately, blaming others is a way of hiding from yourself. It protects you from the discomfort of guilt, but also steals the possibility of growth. It keeps you comfortable but stuck, safe but small. Breaking free means facing the discomfort head-on, admitting your role, and embracing the truth. Mistakes do not define you, but refusing to own them does. Because here's the reality. Growth begins where blame ends, and the moment you stop pointing fingers outward is the moment you point yourself toward freedom. Perfectionism? Perfectionism is one of the most deceptive distortions because, unlike some others, it hides behind the mask of ambition. On the surface, it looks noble, the desire to excel, to achieve, to reach the highest standard. Society even praises it. We admire people who strive for excellence, who hold themselves to high expectations. But perfectionism is not the pursuit of excellence. It is the pursuit of the impossible. And because perfection can never truly be reached, perfectionism becomes a trap of endless striving, endless self-criticism, and endless dissatisfaction. Perfectionism convinces you that anything less than flawless is failure. A student who earns a 95% feels worthless because it wasn't 100%. An athlete who plays brilliantly but makes one small error obsesses over the mistake instead of celebrating their performance. A writer who produces a strong piece of work tears it apart because of a few imperfect sentences. In the mind of a perfectionist, achievements are never enough because there's always something more that could have been done. The bar keeps moving higher, and every victory feels hollow. The danger of perfectionism is not just in how it distorts achievement, but in how it distorts identity. A perfectionist doesn't just say, "I made a mistake." They say, "I am a mistake." Flaws are not seen as natural parts of growth, but as proof of worthlessness. This mindset turns every error into a personal indictment, every imperfection into a symbol of failure. The perfectionist doesn't just strive to do better, they strive to be perfect in order to feel acceptable, lovable, or safe. Childhood often plants the seeds of perfectionism. A child praised only when they achieved the perfect grade, the perfect performance, the perfect behavior, may learn that love is conditional. They internalize the belief, if I am perfect, I am worthy. If I fail, I am nothing. On the other hand, a child who faced harsh criticism for mistakes may grow up fearing imperfection, equating it with punishment, shame, or rejection. Both experiences teach the same lesson. Perfection is the only way to survive. Cultural messages also feed perfectionism. We live in a world where social media showcases highlight reels of flawless lives, filtered photos, curated successes, polished achievements. All of it creates the illusion of perfection as normal. Against that backdrop, ordinary mistakes feel like catastrophic flaws. Add in work cultures that reward overwork, or schools that prize grades over growth, and the message is clear. You are only as good as your achievements. Perfectionism becomes not just a personal distortion, but a collective one. The cost of perfectionism is enormous. On the surface, perfectionists may look successful. They often achieve high standards and produce quality work. But beneath the surface, they are often anxious, self-critical, and exhausted. Their achievements don't bring joy because they immediately see the flaws. Their victories don't bring rest because they immediately set higher goals. The finish line is always moving, and peace is always out of reach. Relationships also suffer under perfectionism. Perfectionists often hold others to impossible standards as well. A partner may feel criticized because nothing they do is ever enough. A friend may feel pressure because small mistakes are magnified into disappointments. Children of perfectionist parents often grow up feeling inadequate, believing love is earned only through achievement. In this way, perfectionism doesn't just imprison the self, it imprisons everyone around it. Perfectionism also stifles creativity. When you believe everything must be flawless, you become afraid to try. You avoid risks because failure is unacceptable. You procrastinate because the fear of imperfection paralyzes you. Many perfectionists appear lazy from the outside, but in truth, they are trapped. They wait until they can do something perfectly, which means they may never start at all. The irony is that in trying to be flawless, they end up producing less, experiencing less, and living less. Another cruel effect of perfectionism is how it distorts self-care. Because perfectionists see rest as laziness, they push themselves relentlessly. They sacrifice sleep, health, and relationships in the name of productivity. Burnout becomes inevitable, but even then, the perfectionist often blames themselves for not being strong enough. The distortion convinces them that balance is weakness and that worth is measured only by output. So how do you break free from perfectionism? The first step is understanding that perfection is not real. It is an illusion, a moving target that cannot be reached. Even if you achieve something extraordinary, your perfectionist mind will find flaws. The goalpost will move, and satisfaction will remain out of reach. Recognizing this truth is the beginning of freedom. The second step is reframing mistakes. Instead of seeing them as evidence of failure, view them as evidence of growth. Every skill, every craft, every achievement is built on a foundation of mistakes. Babies fall before they walk. Writers draft badly before they write well. Musicians play off key before they find harmony. Mistakes are not signs of unworthiness. They are the path to mastery. The more you embrace them, the freer you become. Another practice is self-compassion. Speak to yourself the way you would speak to a friend. If a friend told you they failed a test despite studying hard, would you call them worthless? Or would you remind them of their effort, their strengths, and their potential to improve? Offering yourself the same compassion dismantles the harshness of perfectionism. It teaches you that worth is not conditional on flawless performance. Learning to celebrate progress is also key. Instead of asking, "Was it perfect?" ask, "Did I grow? Did I improve? Did I try?" Shift the standard from perfection to progress, from flawlessness to effort. When you honor progress, you open space for joy. You allow yourself to feel pride even when things are imperfect, because perfection is no longer the goal. Mindfulness can also counter perfectionism. By focusing on the present moment, you release the pressure of the future and the regret of the past. You stop asking, "Will this be perfect?" and start asking, "What am I experiencing right now?" Mindfulness teaches you to appreciate the process instead of obsessing over the outcome. Ultimately, overcoming perfectionism requires a radical redefinition of worth. You are not valuable because you are flawless. You are valuable because you are human, because you learn, grow, love, and live. Perfectionism convinces you that you must earn worth through achievement, but the truth is that worth is inherent. You were born with it. You never lost it. And no mistake, no imperfection, no flaw can take it away. Perfectionism is seductive because it promises safety. If you are perfect, you won't be rejected, you won't be criticized, you won't be abandoned. But the promise is a lie. Even perfection cannot protect you from life, and in chasing it, you miss the messy, imperfect, beautiful reality of being alive. Freedom begins when you step out of the impossible race, when you let go of the illusion of flawlessness and embrace the truth of progress, of humanity, of enoughness. The day you stop chasing perfection is the day you begin to live. Should statements. Should. It seems like such a small, ordinary word, but for many, it becomes a heavy chain. Should statements are a cognitive distortion that quietly shapes the way we judge ourselves, others, and the world. They sound like rules, like commandments carved into stone. I should be more successful by now. I should never make mistakes. I should always be happy, productive, and in control. On the surface, these statements may look like motivation, but in reality, they create pressure, shame, and constant disappointment, because life can never measure up to the endless demands of should. The distortion works like this. Instead of seeing life as it is, you compare it to how you believe it should be. Every gap between reality and expectation becomes a source of pain. You don't allow yourself to celebrate progress because progress isn't perfection. You don't forgive yourself for being human because being human includes flaws. And you don't allow others to be who they are because you measure them against the rigid rules of your internal should. Think about how this plays out internally. A person might wake up feeling tired, but instead of listening to their body, they berate themselves. I should be energized. I should have gone to bed earlier. I should be ready to crush the day. Instead of compassion, they meet themselves with judgment. Another person might look at their career and think, by this age, I should be further along. I should own a house. I should have everything figured out. The weight of these demands makes them feel like failures, even when their path is unique, even when they have accomplished much. Should statements don't stop at the self, they extend outward. A perfectionist boss might think, my employees should always meet my standards. A partner may think, you should know what I want without me saying it. A parent may insist, my child should behave exactly the way I expect. These rigid demands leave little room for flexibility, forgiveness, or understanding. People are measured against unrealistic rules, and when they inevitably fall short, frustration builds. The distortion poisons relationships, replacing empathy with resentment. The danger of should lies in its rigidity. Life is fluid, unpredictable, and imperfect. But should statements turn it into a rigid script? When reality doesn't follow the script, you suffer. Not because life is inherently wrong, but because your expectations were inflexible. This is why people trapped in should statements often feel constant stress. They are always fighting against reality, always pushing themselves and others toward an impossible standard. The roots of this distortion often lie in childhood. Many people grew up hearing constant shoulds. You should be polite. You should work harder. You should make us proud. These rules, repeated over and over, become internalized as truths. Some are helpful, teaching discipline, kindness, responsibility. But when the rules become rigid and unforgiving, they shape a mind that never feels good enough. The child grows into an adult who measures themselves against an endless list of obligations, never pausing to ask, who created these rules? Are they even mine? Culture also amplifies this distortion. Social media bombards us with comparisons. You should look like this. You should travel here. You should earn this much money. You should be married by this age. You should always be improving. Advertisements thrive on shoulds, convincing you that happiness lies just beyond your current state. If only you buy this product, follow this plan, achieve this goal. Society becomes a constant voice of demand, and the individual becomes a prisoner of unattainable standards. The cost of should statements is profound. They create guilt when you fail to meet your own unrealistic standards. They create shame when you compare yourself to others. They create anger when other people don't behave according to your rules. And they create despair because the gap between what is and what should be never closes. No matter how much you achieve, there will always be another should waiting on the horizon. Even small, everyday situations are tainted by this distortion. You tell yourself, I should exercise every day. On the days you miss, instead of saying, that's okay, I'll get back on track tomorrow, you berate yourself. I'm lazy, I failed again. You tell yourself, I should never feel anxious. When anxiety inevitably arises, you double your suffering. First the anxiety, then the shame of believing you shouldn't feel it. In this way, should statements create suffering on top of suffering, turning ordinary challenges into evidence of failure. So how do you break free from this mental trap? The first step is awareness. Start listening for the word should in your thoughts. It often hides in plain sight. I should have done better. They should know better. Life should be easier. Each time you notice it, pause. Ask yourself, is this a realistic expectation, or is this distortion talking? The second step is reframing. Replace should with words that create flexibility. Instead of, I should exercise every day, try, I'd like to exercise more often because it helps me feel healthy. Instead of, I should never make mistakes, try, I prefer to do well, but mistakes are part of learning. This simple shift removes the rigid demand and replaces it with intention, preference, and growth. Another practice is self-compassion. When you catch yourself thinking, I should have done better, respond as you would to a friend. If your friend said, I only studied 4 hours instead of 6, I'm a failure, you would remind them of their effort, their progress, and their humanity. Offering yourself the same kindness dismantles the harshness of should statements and replaces it with gentleness. Mindfulness is also powerful here. Should statements often keep us trapped in the future or past, focused on what should have been or what should be next. Mindfulness anchors you in the present, where reality unfolds as it is, not as it should be. When you breathe deeply and notice the moment without judgment, you loosen the grip of the shoulds. You begin to see that life is not about conforming to rigid rules, but about experiencing reality with openness. Finally, challenge the source of your shoulds. Ask yourself, whose voice is this? Is it mine, or is it my parents', my culture's, society's? Do I actually believe this, or have I simply carried it unquestioned? By identifying the origin of your shoulds, you reclaim power to decide which ones to keep and which ones to release. The truth is this: you are not here to live a life of shoulds. You are here to live a life of growth, balance, and authenticity. Should statements shrink life into an endless checklist of impossible demands, but when you let go of them, you open space for freedom, joy, and self-acceptance. Because here's the reality: there is no perfect script for how life should be. There is only the life you are living, imperfect and unfolding. And the day you stop punishing yourself with should is the day you finally begin to live in peace with what is. Unrealistic comparisons. Few things damage self-worth as quietly, yet as deeply as the habit of unrealistic comparisons. It is one of the most subtle, yet relentless distortions of the mind. At its core, unrealistic comparisons convince you that your value, your progress, your achievements, your very existence can only be measured against someone else's. Instead of living your own journey, you constantly weigh yourself on the scale of others' lives, and inevitably, you come up short. Comparisons themselves aren't always toxic. As humans, we naturally notice differences. Sometimes comparison inspires growth. Seeing someone's achievement can motivate you to aim higher. But unrealistic comparisons distort this natural tendency. They make you measure yourself not against reality, but against an illusion. You compare your struggles to someone else's highlights. You compare your beginning to someone else's middle or end. You compare your ordinary life to someone's carefully curated image of perfection. And then, unsurprisingly, you conclude that you are lacking. Consider the way social media amplifies this distortion. Every day you scroll through highlight reels, perfect vacations, flawless bodies, glamorous lifestyles, success stories. Rarely do you see the behind-the-scenes reality, the exhaustion, the failures, the doubts, the arguments, the lonely nights. But your mind forgets this. It treats the highlight reel as the full picture. So when you look at your messy, imperfect, unfiltered life, you conclude, I'm not enough. Everyone else is doing better than me. The cruelty of unrealistic comparisons is that they erase context. You don't just compare your life to someone else's. You ignore the fact that their circumstances, opportunities, and struggles are completely different from yours. A person born into privilege will have resources and access that others do not. A person in a different stage of life will naturally have different achievements. But comparisons flatten all of this complexity. They convince you that you should be exactly where someone else is, regardless of the fact that your paths are not the same. This distortion can appear early in life. Children who are constantly compared to siblings or peers internalize the belief that their worth is always relative. A child who hears, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" or "Look how well she's doing, you should be like her," begins to see themselves as inadequate by default. They grow into adults who measure themselves against everyone around them, never feeling like they measure up. Unrealistic comparisons also feed perfectionism. Instead of striving for personal progress, you strive to match or surpass someone else's achievements. If your friend buys a house, you feel like a failure for renting. If a colleague gets a promotion, you feel behind in your career. If someone looks fitter, wealthier, or happier, you feel inferior, even though their journey has nothing to do with yours. This constant comparison creates an endless cycle of dissatisfaction, because there will always be someone who appears to have more. The cost of this distortion is immense. It steals joy from your achievements, because you're too busy comparing them to others. You may land a good job, but feel like it's worthless compared to your friend's dream job. You may accomplish something meaningful, but dismiss it because someone else achieved more. Even when you succeed, the success feels small, because the measuring stick is always outside of you. Relationships also suffer when unrealistic comparisons take root. Instead of appreciating your partner, you compare them to someone else's partner. Instead of cherishing your family, you compare them to another family's appearance. Instead of supporting your friends, you secretly envy them. These comparisons create bitterness and resentment making it harder to truly connect with others. At its worst, this distortion can lead to despair. When you constantly feel behind, inadequate, or unworthy compared to others, you may begin to lose hope. Depression, anxiety, and self-hatred often grow from the soil of endless comparison. Because no matter how much you achieve, there will always be someone with more, leaving you stuck in a race you can never win. So how do you break free? The first step is awareness. Begin to notice when you are comparing. Pay attention to the thoughts that arise. They're doing better than me. I should have what they have. I'll never measure up. Recognize these for what they are, distortions, not truths. The second step is to reframe. Instead of asking, how do I compare? Ask, what can I learn? If someone is ahead of you in one area, use it as inspiration rather than condemnation. Their success does not diminish yours. It shows what is possible. When you shift comparison from competition to inspiration, it loses its toxic grip. Another key is practicing gratitude. When you focus on what you lack compared to others, you feed envy. When you focus on what you already have, you cultivate contentment. Gratitude grounds you in your own journey. It reminds you that your life, with all its imperfections, has value and meaning. Limiting exposure to triggers also helps. If social media constantly fuels your comparisons, take breaks. Unfollow accounts that make you feel inferior. Curate your environment to support your well-being instead of undermining it. Comparison thrives on constant exposure to curated images. Reducing that exposure weakens its power. Perhaps the most important step is redefining success. As long as success is measured externally, by what others have or do, you will always feel behind. Redefine success in terms of your values, your growth, your progress. Ask yourself, am I moving closer to the person I want to be? Am I growing compared to who I was yesterday? When you measure success inwardly instead of outwardly, you reclaim your sense of worth. The truth is this: your life is not supposed to look like anyone else's. You are not here to live their story. You are here to live yours. Unrealistic comparisons distort this truth, making you blind to your own path. But when you let go of them, you free yourself to appreciate your journey as it is, unique, imperfect, and meaningful. Because here's the reality. There will always be someone richer, smarter, more accomplished, or more attractive, but there will also always be only one you. And your value does not depend on comparison. It depends on the simple fact that you exist, you grow, you love, and you live. Freedom begins the moment you stop asking, how do I measure up? And start asking, who am I becoming? Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is one of the most invisible yet powerful distortions of the human mind. It is the tendency to seek, notice, and remember information that supports what you already believe, while ignoring, dismissing, or minimizing information that challenges it. On the surface, it feels harmless, even logical. After all, we all like to be right. But beneath the surface, confirmation bias quietly warps our perception of reality, making the world appear to confirm our fears, our doubts, and our assumptions, even when they are distorted. Think about how this works in everyday life. Imagine someone who believes they are unlovable. They walk into a room where 10 people greet them warmly, but one person seems distracted and barely says hello. The confirmation bias immediately highlights that one cold response and uses it as proof. See, I'm not lovable. People don't like me. The 9 friendly greetings are ignored because they don't fit the belief. The mind filters reality, keeping only what supports its existing conclusion. This distortion can be especially destructive when paired with low self-esteem. If you believe you are not good enough, you will unconsciously search for evidence to support that belief. A small criticism will feel enormous, while compliments will be brushed off as meaningless. If you believe you will fail, you will notice every setback as proof, while ignoring progress. Over time, confirmation bias becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You don't just believe something, you create an entire reality where it seems true. Relationships often suffer under this bias. A person who believes their partner doesn't truly care will notice every missed call, every forgotten detail, every moment of distraction. They won't notice the acts of love, the support, the sacrifices, because their mind isn't looking for them. Another person may believe, that others are untrustworthy. With this lens, every small disappointment becomes evidence of betrayal, while countless examples of loyalty are erased. Confirmation bias turns relationships into distorted mirrors, reflecting not reality, but the fears we project onto others. This distortion also plays out in larger systems. In politics, religion, and culture, people often seek out news, communities, and voices that echo what they already believe. They scroll past articles that challenge their worldview and share only the ones that reinforce it. This creates echo chambers where beliefs, no matter how extreme, feel confirmed. The bias doesn't just shape individual perception, it shapes entire societies, deepening division and polarization. The roots of confirmation bias are ancient. From an evolutionary perspective, believing what we already believe helped us survive. Doubt and contradiction take mental energy. Our brains learn to simplify by favoring familiar information. If you believed a certain food was poisonous, confirmation bias kept you safe by noticing every story of people harmed by it, while ignoring stories of people who ate it safely. In survival terms, being cautious made sense. But in modern life, this same bias often distorts more than it protects. Confirmation bias is especially damaging because it feels like truth. When your mind presents you with evidence that supports your beliefs, it feels convincing. If you think, "I'm a failure," and then recall the one time you failed an exam, it feels like proof. You forget the dozens of times you succeeded because they don't fit the belief. You don't see that your proof is cherry-picked, distorted, incomplete. To you, it feels like undeniable reality. The cost of this distortion is immense. It keeps people stuck in cycles of self-doubt because they constantly find evidence of their flaws. It keeps people locked in fear because they only notice dangers and ignore safety. It keeps people in unhealthy relationships because they interpret every crumb of attention as proof that things will change. It keeps people closed to growth because they reject any feedback that challenges their worldview. Confirmation bias is not just a distortion, it is a prison of perception. So how do you break free? The first step is awareness. Begin to notice how your mind filters reality. Ask yourself, what evidence am I paying attention to? What am I ignoring? When you catch yourself drawing a conclusion, pause and ask, am I looking at the full picture or only the parts that confirm my belief? The second step is deliberate contradiction. Seek out information that challenges your assumptions. If you believe you always fail, make a list of times you succeeded. If you believe people don't care, look for acts of kindness you usually dismiss. If you believe the world is dangerous, notice moments of safety and support. Actively collecting evidence against your belief weakens the bias. Another practice is curiosity. Instead of trying to prove your beliefs right, practice asking, what else could be true? What other explanations exist? For example, if someone seems distant, instead of concluding they don't like me, you might ask, could they be tired, distracted, dealing with something personal? Curiosity opens doors that confirmation bias closes. Challenging confirmation bias also requires humility. It means admitting that you don't always see reality clearly, that your mind has blind spots. This humility is not weakness, it is strength. It allows you to step beyond distortion into truth. People who can question their own assumptions are not gullible, they are free. Therapeutic tools can help dismantle this bias as well. Cognitive behavioral techniques encourage you to actively test beliefs rather than assume they're true. Journaling about evidence for and against your assumptions forces you to confront contradictions. Even mindfulness helps. By slowing down your reactions, you notice when your mind is filtering reality, and you have the space to choose a different response. The most liberating truth about confirmation bias is this: your beliefs shape your perception, but they don't have to define it. You can learn to see more than just the evidence that confirms your fears. You can learn to notice the love, the progress, the possibilities that your bias usually erases. You can open your eyes to the full spectrum of reality. Because here's the reality: confirmation bias doesn't make your beliefs true. It only makes them feel true. And the day you learn to challenge it, to step outside of its narrow frame, is the day you begin to see life as it actually is, not as your fears paint it. Freedom begins not with being right, but with being willing to see. Hostile attribution bias. Hostile attribution bias is one of the most corrosive distortions of human thought because it doesn't just distort your perception of yourself. It distorts your entire view of other people. At its core, this bias convinces you that others' actions are driven by malice, that behind neutral or ambiguous behavior there is hidden hostility, disrespect, or intent to harm. It makes you interpret everyday life as an attack. A stranger's glance feels like judgment. A friend's silence feels like betrayal. A colleague's blunt words feel like deliberate disrespect. Hostile attribution bias transforms the ordinary friction of human interaction into evidence of personal threat. This distortion begins with interpretation. Imagine walking down the street and seeing someone you know pass by without greeting you. A neutral mind might consider, they didn't see me, they're distracted, they're in a hurry. But with hostile attribution bias, the mind leaps immediately to, they ignored me on purpose, they must dislike me, they're trying to send me a message. The action, though ambiguous, is reinterpreted as deliberate harm. And once the mind makes that leap, emotions of anger, resentment, or defensiveness follow. In relationships, this bias can be devastating. A partner who forgets to take out the trash may be accused of disrespect. You did that to annoy me. You don't care about me. A friend who takes too long to reply to a message may be judged as untrustworthy. You're avoiding me. You must be hiding something. Over time, the constant assumption of hostility erodes trust. Instead of curiosity or compassion, interactions are filtered through suspicion. The relationship becomes a battlefield where every action is seen as a potential attack. The roots of hostile attribution bias often lie in early experiences. A child who grew up in a hostile or unpredictable environment may learn to assume threat as a survival mechanism. If caregivers were volatile, the child may have developed hypervigilance, scanning constantly for danger. In adulthood, this protective lens remains, even when the environment is no longer dangerous. The bias, once a shield, becomes a distortion, convincing the person that hostility lurks behind every interaction. This bias also grows in environments marked by conflict. In communities where competition, mistrust, or aggression are common, people learn to interpret ambiguous behavior as hostile simply to protect themselves. But the more it is practiced, the more it solidifies. Over time, hostile attribution bias becomes not just a lens but a worldview. People are out to get me. Others can't be trusted. Everyone is against me. The cost of this distortion is heavy. It creates unnecessary anger. Small slights or accidents are interpreted as attacks, fueling resentment that may not be justified. It creates defensiveness because the person feels constantly under siege. And it creates loneliness because relationships cannot thrive without trust. People grow weary of being accused, doubted, or treated as enemies. Eventually, they may distance themselves, ironically confirming the distorted belief that others are hostile. This bias also fuels conflict cycles. When you interpret someone's ambiguous behavior as hostile, you respond defensively or aggressively. They, in turn, may react with irritation or withdrawal, which you then interpret as further hostility. A cycle is created where suspicion generates the very hostility it feared. Hostile attribution bias is self-reinforcing. It not only misinterprets reality, it helps create the reality it expects. The tragedy is that this bias blinds people to genuine care and connection. If you believe others are against you, you dismiss their kindness as fake, their loyalty as manipulation, their affection as temporary. You never fully let yourself trust or receive love, because the suspicion of hidden hostility lingers. This robs life of intimacy and warmth. You may be surrounded by people who genuinely care, but you live as though surrounded by enemies. So how do you begin to dismantle hostile attribution bias? The first step is awareness. Notice when your mind jumps to hostile interpretations. Pay attention to the speed of your conclusions. Did someone's silence instantly become, they hate me? Did a blunt comment instantly become, they're attacking me? Awareness helps you slow the distortion before it takes root. The second step is to practice alternative explanations. Instead of defaulting to hostility, ask, what else could this mean? If someone doesn't greet you, could they be distracted? If a friend cancels plans, could they be tired? If a colleague is curt, could they be stressed? Even if hostility is possible, it is rarely the only explanation. Training your mind to generate alternatives weakens the bias. Another tool is emotional regulation. Hostile attribution bias thrives on reactive anger. When you feel the surge of defensiveness, pause, breathe, Remind yourself that interpretation is not fact. Just because you feel disrespected does not mean disrespect was intended. Slowing down your response creates space for more balanced thinking. Empathy is also powerful. Instead of focusing solely on how others' behavior affects you, consider what they may be experiencing. A person who snaps may be carrying stress. A person who forgets may be overwhelmed. Empathy doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it opens the door to understanding rather than hostility. Therapeutic approaches, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, often help challenge this bias. By recording situations, interpretations, and alternative explanations, people can begin to see patterns in their thinking. Over time, the habit of assuming hostility can be replaced with a more balanced approach. At its heart, dismantling hostile attribution bias requires trust, not blind trust, but cautious, intentional trust. It means allowing the possibility that people are not always out to harm you, that sometimes they are neutral, sometimes they are kind, sometimes they are distracted or struggling. Trust doesn't mean ignoring real hostility. It means not assuming hostility when there is no clear evidence. The truth is this: the world is not filled with enemies. People are flawed, yes. They make mistakes. They can be careless or thoughtless. But most people are not driven by constant malice. Most people are too consumed by their own struggles to plot hostility against you. Hostile attribution bias shrinks the world into a battlefield. But reality is more complex, more nuanced, and often far kinder than the distortion allows you to see. Freedom begins the moment you stop interpreting every silence as an insult, every mistake as an attack, every imperfection as betrayal. It begins when you allow ambiguity to exist without rushing to hostility. And it deepens when you open yourself to the possibility that people are not against you. Some are, in fact, for you. Because here's the truth: not everyone is your enemy. And the moment you stop seeing ghosts of hostility in every shadow is the moment you finally begin to live with peace, connection, and trust. Fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error is one of the most subtle yet damaging distortions, because it shapes how we see people, not just in fleeting moments, but in lasting judgments. It is the tendency to explain other people's behavior by blaming their character, while explaining our own behavior by pointing to circumstances. In other words, when they make a mistake, it's because they are flawed. When we make a mistake, it's because the situation was unfair. At first glance, this seems almost harmless, even natural. But over time, the fundamental attribution error distorts reality. It makes you harsher on others than you are on yourself. It fuels misunderstandings, resentment, and division. And it keeps you from truly seeing the complexity of human beings. Picture this: you're driving, and someone cuts you off in traffic. Instantly, your mind jumps to judgment. What an idiot. They're reckless. They don't care about anyone else. You label their character, but imagine if you were the one cutting someone off. Chances are, you'd explain it differently. I didn't see them. I'm in a hurry because I'm late for work. I'm stressed. When it's someone else, you blame their personality. When it's you, you blame the situation. That's the fundamental attribution error at work. This distortion doesn't just play out in traffic. It permeates every area of life. At work, when a colleague misses a deadline, you might think, they're lazy, they're unorganized, they just don't care. But if you miss a deadline, you're quick to explain, I had too much on my plate, the task wasn't clear, life got in the way. The exact same behavior is judged differently depending on whether it's yours or theirs. In relationships, this distortion creates walls. If your partner forgets something important, you might assume they're selfish, they don't value me. But if you forget or get something, you see it as an accident caused by stress or distraction. Over time, this double standard corrodes trust, because you hold others to a harsher standard than you hold yourself. They become defined by their mistakes, while you remain defined by your intentions. The roots of this bias lie in how our minds process information. When we look at others, we see only their actions. We don't see their thoughts, their pressures, their unseen struggles. So we fill in the blanks with assumptions, usually about their character. But when we look at ourselves, we have access to all the hidden context, our intentions, our emotions, our circumstances. The asymmetry of information creates asymmetry of judgment. The fundamental attribution error is not just personal, it is cultural. Societies that emphasize individualism often focus on character over context. We're taught to admire strong individuals and blame weak ones. We highlight winners and dismiss losers, rarely pausing to consider how circumstances, opportunities, and luck shape those outcomes. The distortion becomes woven into how we judge entire groups of people. The poor are lazy, the rich are greedy, the unemployed are unmotivated, the successful are inherently superior. Complex realities are reduced to simple labels. The cost of this distortion is immense. It fuels prejudice because it reduces people to stereotypes. It fuels conflict because it convinces you that others' flaws are personal, not situational. It damages relationships because you assume the worst of others while excusing yourself. And it stunts empathy because you stop asking, what might they be going through? And instead conclude, that's just who they are. In workplaces, this bias erodes teamwork. When a coworker is late, you assume laziness. But when you're late, you point to traffic or emergencies. Over time, teams fracture under the weight of harsh judgments because no one stops to see the bigger picture. Breaking free from the fundamental attribution error begins with humility. It requires admitting that we don't see the whole story. We see actions, but not the hidden battles behind them. The colleague who seems lazy may be struggling with depression. The friend who cancels plans may be overwhelmed. The stranger who was rude may be carrying grief. You don't know their full context, just as they don't know yours. The second step is empathy. Instead of rushing to judgment, practice asking, what else could explain this? Instead of assuming character flaws, consider situational causes. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it balances the lens. Empathy doesn't mean ignoring accountability. It means acknowledging humanity. Another practice is self-reflection. Notice when you're quick to excuse yourself, but harsh toward others. Ask yourself, if I had done the same thing, how would I explain it? Then extend that same generosity to others. By holding yourself and others to equal standards, you replace distortion with fairness. Mindfulness helps too. Slow down before reacting. When anger rises, pause and breathe. Remind yourself, this is just my interpretation. I don't know the whole story yet. That pause creates space for compassion instead of blame. Ultimately, breaking this distortion requires a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing people as fixed characters, lazy, selfish, rude, begin to see them as humans navigating circumstances, just as you are. Remember that behavior is not the whole story. Remember that you too are sometimes careless, distracted, or short-tempered, not because you are bad, but because you are human. The truth is this: people are more than their mistakes, and so are you. The fundamental attribution error convinces us to see others through the harshest lens while protecting ourselves with the gentlest. But life becomes richer, relationships stronger, and empathy deeper when we reverse the pattern, when we give others the grace we so easily give ourselves. Because here's the reality: you never know what battle someone else is fighting, and the moment you stop assuming the worst about their character is the moment you begin to see them, not as villains or enemies, but as fellow humans, just like you. Illusion of control. The illusion of control is one of the most deceptive distortions because it convinces you that life is entirely in your hands. That if you think hard enough, prepare well enough, plan carefully enough, you can prevent every failure, every mistake, every loss. On the surface, this belief looks empowering. It makes you feel responsible, capable, and in charge. But beneath the surface, it becomes a heavy burden because the truth of life is that so much is beyond your control. The illusion convinces you otherwise, and when reality breaks that illusion, the result is guilt, frustration, and despair. This distortion shows up in countless ways. A parent believes that if they do everything right, their child will grow up perfect, kind, successful, safe. When the child struggles, makes mistakes, or suffers setbacks, the parent blames themselves. I should have done more. I should have prevented this. The illusion convinces them they had total control over another human being's life, when in reality, children are influenced by countless factors beyond parental reach: peers, environment, personality, circumstance, luck. Consider someone facing illness. They might believe, if I eat perfectly, exercise daily, and think positively, nothing bad will ever happen to me. While healthy habits reduce risk, they cannot eliminate uncertainty. Genetics, accidents, and random chance all play roles. But when illness arrives despite their efforts, the illusion of control collapses into self-blame. This must be my fault. I could have prevented this. What was meant to empower instead becomes a source of shame. Even in everyday situations, the illusion of control creeps in. You might believe you can control how people see you if you behave perfectly. You might believe you can control outcomes at work if you plan every detail. You might believe you can avoid pain in relationships if you say and do everything right. But reality is stubborn. People still misunderstand you, plans still fall apart, relationships still hurt. No amount of control can erase life's unpredictability. At its core, the illusion of control is driven by fear. Uncertainty terrifies us. The idea that bad things can happen for no reason, that outcomes can be random, that suffering can strike without warning, it is unbearable. So, the mind invents a false comfort. If I just try harder, I can prevent it. The illusion becomes a shield against chaos. But instead of protecting us, it traps us in endless striving, endless guilt, endless exhaustion. This distortion often has roots in childhood. A child growing up in unstable environments may learn to control what little they can. If they kept the peace, stayed quiet, or performed perfectly, maybe they avoided punishment or chaos. The child grows into an adult who believes control equals safety. But the strategy that once helped them survive becomes a prison later in life because they still cling to the illusion that everything depends on their effort. Culturally, this distortion is reinforced constantly. We are told, you can achieve anything if you just work hard enough. Your destiny is in your hands. Failure is a choice. While motivation has its place, these messages erase the reality of structural barriers, systemic issues, and pure chance. They convince people that every failure is personal failure. Not bad luck, not outside influence, but their own fault. The illusion of control becomes a societal weight, pressing down on anyone who stumbles. The cost of this distortion is immense. It creates anxiety because you feel responsible for preventing every possible outcome. You overthink, overprepare, overanalyze, always trying to cover every angle. It creates guilt because when things go wrong, you blame yourself, even when you couldn't have prevented it. It creates exhaustion because controlling life is an impossible task, and yet you never stop trying. The illusion of control also damages relationships. People who believe they can control everything often try to control others, their partner, their children, their friends. They give advice no one asked for, insist on their way, micromanage every decision. Their intentions may be rooted in care, but the effect is suffocating. Loved ones feel mistrusted and disempowered, and connections weaken. The illusion of control isolates because it leaves no room for trust in others. So how do you dismantle this distortion? The first step is acceptance. Not passive resignation, but radical acceptance of reality. Life is a mix of what you can control and what you cannot. You can control your effort, your choices, your values. You cannot control other people, random events, or the mysteries of chance. Separating the two is liberating. It allows you to focus energy where it matters and release what doesn't. The second step is balance. Instead of asking, how do I prevent every bad thing, ask, what is within my influence and what isn't? For example, you cannot control whether someone loves you, but you can control how you show up authentically in relationships. You cannot control whether a storm cancels your plans, but you can control your response. You cannot control the fact that death and loss are inevitable, but you can control how you live while you're here. Balance shifts you from futile control to meaningful influence. Mindfulness is another powerful tool. By anchoring yourself in the present, you release the illusion that you must control the future. You stop spinning endless scenarios of what might go wrong and instead focus on what is true now. Mindfulness teaches you that life is unfolding moment by moment, not as a script you can write in advance. Gratitude also weakens the illusion. When you practice noticing what is, instead of obsessing over what you can't control, you open space for peace. You begin to see that even in uncertainty, there are moments of beauty, safety, and joy. Gratitude doesn't erase risk, but it softens fear by grounding you in reality. Perhaps the most difficult step is releasing guilt. When something goes wrong, your instinct may be to think, I should have prevented this. Instead, remind yourself, I did what I could. Some things are beyond me. Guilt for what you could never control is wasted suffering. Forgiving yourself is not weakness. It is truth. The illusion of control convinces us that life can be mastered. But life is not a problem to solve. It is an experience to live. Control is limited, and that limitation is not a flaw but a fact. The more you resist it, the more you suffer. The more you accept it, the freer you become. Because here's the reality. You cannot control everything. You never could. And you never needed to. Your worth is not measured by your ability to prevent chaos, but by your courage to live fully despite it. Freedom begins when you release the illusion and embrace the truth. You are responsible for your effort, not for the universe. External control fallacy. The external control fallacy is one of the most quietly destructive distortions of the mind. It convinces you that your life, your happiness, your success, and your sense of worth are entirely dependent on forces outside yourself, on people, circumstances, or luck. It makes you believe that your inner world is controlled by the outer world, leaving you feeling powerless, helpless, and at the mercy of everything you cannot change. At first, this belief feels like truth. After all, isn't life shaped by what happens around us? Jobs are given or taken away. Relationships succeed or fail. Economies rise and collapse. People treat us with kindness or cruelty. From the outside, it seems obvious that our happiness is determined by external forces. But the distortion lies in the exaggeration. External control fallacy doesn't just acknowledge that external events influence us. It convinces you they define you. It erases your ability to respond, to choose, to reclaim agency. This distortion shows up in phrases like, I can't be happy unless they love me. I'll never succeed unless someone gives me an opportunity. I can't feel confident unless people approve of me. In each of these, control of your inner world is handed over to someone or something else. Your happiness becomes conditional, your identity becomes fragile, and your sense of worth becomes chained to circumstances you can't fully control. Imagine a person who believes they can only be happy if they are in a relationship. When they are single, they feel worthless. When they are partnered, their happiness depends on every word, every gesture, every mood of the other person. Their partner becomes not just a companion, but the gatekeeper of their entire emotional state. This is the external control fallacy at work. Life is lived not from within, but as a reaction to forces outside. The workplace reveals this distortion clearly. Someone may believe, I can't succeed unless my boss recognizes me. When recognition doesn't come, they feel defeated, even if they are doing meaningful work. Or a person may think, I can't be secure unless the economy is perfect. When uncertainty arises, as it always does, they spiral into despair. External events become the master of their inner stability. The roots of this fallacy often lie in environments where people genuinely lacked control. A child growing up in chaos, where parents' moods dictated safety, or where poverty limited opportunities, may learn to equate external conditions with internal well-being. That child grows into an adult who still believes, deep down, that peace, safety, and happiness only exist when the outside world cooperates. Culture also reinforces this distortion. Advertisements constantly tell us, you'll only be happy if you buy this product. You'll only feel confident if you look this way. You'll only be successful if you achieve this lifestyle. Media sells external solutions to internal problems, convincing us that fulfillment is something to acquire, not something to cultivate. The fallacy is profitable, but it is also imprisoning. The cost of this distortion is profound. It creates helplessness because you believe your happiness is out of your hands. It creates resentment because you blame others for your unhappiness. If only they treated me better, I'd be okay. It creates passivity because you wait for circumstances to change instead of taking action. And it creates fragility because every setback feels catastrophic. If the world controls your well-being, then every change threatens your stability. So, how do you dismantle the external control fallacy? The first step is recognizing the truth. While you cannot control everything that happens, you always retain the power to choose your response. You cannot stop storms from coming, but you can choose whether you collapse in despair or adapt with resilience. You cannot force others to love you, but you can choose to cultivate self-respect and surround yourself with those who value you. Control is limited, but it is not absent. The second step is reframing responsibility. Instead of saying, they make me angry, recognize, I feel angry in response to what they did, but my anger is mine to manage. Instead of saying, my happiness depends on them, shift to, my happiness is influenced by them, but rooted in me. This subtle shift transforms you from victim of circumstance to active participant in your inner world. Another practice is cultivating internal anchors. Instead of tying your self-worth to external approval, anchor it in values. Am I living according to what matters to me? Am I growing even when no one notices? Instead of tying your joy to external achievements, anchor it in presence. Can I find beauty in the moment, even when the circumstances are imperfect? Internal anchors cannot be taken away by shifting circumstances. Mindfulness also breaks this fallacy. By focusing on the present moment without judgment, you discover that peace is possible even amid chaos. You realize that suffering often comes not from events themselves, but from the stories you tell about them. This means I'm doomed. This means I'll never be okay. Mindfulness interrupts those stories, reminding you that reality is not always as catastrophic as the distortion claims. Gratitude helps too. When you practice noticing what is within your life right now, you reclaim appreciation that is independent of perfection. You may not control everything, but you can still recognize moments of kindness, small victories, or simple joys. Gratitude shifts the focus from what is lacking outside to what is abundant inside. Finally, reclaiming agency means accepting limits. True freedom comes not from controlling everything, but from releasing what you cannot control. It means saying, I will do my best with what I have. I will take responsibility for my actions and my growth. And I will let go of the rest. This isn't weakness, it's strength. It acknowledges reality and places power where it belongs, not in the chaos of the external world, but in the steady choices of your inner one. The external control fallacy convinces you that your life belongs to the world, but the truth is that your life belongs to you. The world will always change. People will come and go, circumstances will rise and fall. But your response, your choices, your perspective, those are yours. And they are more powerful than you've been taught to believe. Because here's the reality. You are not powerless. You never were. And the day you stop waiting for the world to give you peace is the day you finally begin to create it for yourself. Labeling is one of the simplest distortions to understand, but one of the most damaging to live with. At its core, labeling is the act of reducing yourself, or someone else, to a single word, a single identity, a single judgment. It takes the complexity of human experience and flattens it into one definition. Instead of saying, I made a mistake, labeling says, I am a failure. Instead of saying, they acted selfishly, labeling says, they are selfish. The difference seems small, but the consequences are enormous. Humans are complex beings. We are layered, contradictory, ever-changing. But labeling erases that complexity. It convinces you that one action defines the whole person. A bad day becomes, I am useless. A single flaw becomes, I am worthless. One argument becomes, they are terrible. Labeling doesn't leave space for growth, change, or nuance. It freezes people in the harshest interpretation of a single moment. This distortion thrives on extremes. Imagine a student who fails one exam. A balanced perspective might say, I didn't study enough, I need to try harder next time. But labeling takes over and whispers, I'm stupid, I'll never succeed. One event becomes a permanent identity. The failure is no longer about effort, timing, or strategy. It becomes about who the person is at their core, and once that label sticks, it shapes how they see themselves forever. Labeling is equally cruel when directed at others. A partner forgets to do something, and instead of saying, they made a mistake, the mind says, they're careless, they don't care about me. A stranger cuts you off in traffic, and instead of, they're in a hurry, it becomes, they're an idiot. Over time, relationships are poisoned because people are defined by their worst moments instead of their full humanity. The roots of labeling often go back to childhood. Many people grew up hearing labels constantly. You're lazy, you're smart, you're difficult, you're a troublemaker. These words, repeated over and over, sink deep into the subconscious. The child learns not to separate actions from identity. They don't think, I didn't clean my room. They think, I am lazy. These labels, even if untrue, shape self-perception well into adulthood. Culture reinforces labeling in subtle ways. We love categories, definitions, identities. We say, he's a winner, she's a failure, they're a genius, they're a mess. We take complex human beings and shrink them into single stories. Social media intensifies this, rewarding quick judgments and one-dimensional portrayals. But every label erases truth. No one is entirely a winner or entirely a failure. No one is fully a genius or fully a mess. People are far more complex than labels allow. The cost of labeling is heavy. When you label yourself negatively, you crush self-esteem. You stop seeing mistakes as opportunities to grow and instead see them as proof of unworthiness. This creates hopelessness because how do you fix yourself if the problem is not your behavior, but your entire identity? Labeling makes change feel impossible. When you label others, you damage connection. You stop seeing their complexity, their struggles, their humanity. A friend becomes selfish. A colleague becomes lazy. A partner becomes uncaring. Once these labels stick, you filter every interaction through them. Even when they act differently, the label blinds you. This creates resentment, erodes empathy, and often ends relationships prematurely. Labeling also fuels prejudice. Stereotypes are just labels applied to groups. When you say, they're all like that, you erase individuality and reduce people to a single, distorted definition. This not only dehumanizes others, but also justifies mistreatment, because labels make it easier to judge without compassion. So, how do you dismantle labeling? The first step is noticing language. Pay attention to words like I am or they are. If those statements reduce a person to one quality, labeling is at work. Instead of saying, I am a failure, shift to, I failed this time, but I can learn. Instead of, they are selfish, shift to, they acted selfishly in that moment. The difference is profound. Actions are temporary and changeable. Identities are fixed. By shifting from identity to action, you open space for growth. The second step is self-compassion. When you make a mistake, resist the urge to define yourself by it. Speak to yourself the way you would to a friend. You made an error, but that doesn't make you worthless. You're learning. Over time, this softens the harshness of labels and replaces them with truth, that you are not defined by a single moment. Empathy also dismantles labeling toward others. When someone disappoints you, instead of labeling them, ask, what might they be going through? Recognize that behavior is shaped by countless factors: stress, circumstance, unseen struggles. Labeling reduces, empathy expands. Mindfulness is another tool. By staying present, you see actions as they are, without attaching heavy judgments. A mistake is just a mistake. A flaw is just a flaw. You don't need to turn it into an identity. Mindfulness allows you to experience reality without immediately distorting it with labels. Another powerful practice is reframing positive labels too. At first, positive labels seem harmless. I'm smart. They're reliable. But even positive labels can trap. If you believe I'm smart, one failure can shatter your identity. If you believe they're reliable, one mistake can feel like betrayal. Instead of labeling, embrace fluid descriptions. I often do well in this area, but sometimes I struggle. They usually come through, but like everyone, they can slip. Fluidity reflects reality better than rigid labels. The truth is this: no one can be summed up in a single word. You are not a failure. You are a human who sometimes fails and sometimes succeeds. Others are not bad people. They are complex humans who sometimes hurt, sometimes heal, sometimes falter, and sometimes shine. Labeling strips away that complexity, but life is lived in the layers. Freedom begins when you stop reducing yourself and others to labels. It begins when you see mistakes as moments, not identities, flaws as parts, not definitions. It begins when you allow yourself and others to be works in progress instead of finished products stamped with one word. Because here's the reality: you are not your worst moment. You are not your best moment either. You are more than any label, more than any word. You are an entire story, still unfolding. And the moment you reject labels is the moment you reclaim the fullness of that story. Mislabeling. Mislabeling is a cousin of labeling, but with an even harsher twist. While labeling reduces people or situations into single words, mislabeling takes it further. It uses exaggerated, inaccurate, and overly emotional words to define yourself, others, or events. It doesn't just flatten reality, it distorts it completely. Mislabeling isn't about simply calling yourself lazy after a mistake. It's about saying, I'm pathetic, I'm disgusting, I'm worthless. It isn't about saying someone forgot something important. It's about declaring they're horrible, they're evil, they're trash. The difference between labeling and mislabeling is intensity. Labeling is restrictive. Mislabeling is destructive. It injects venom into the words you use, turning ordinary mistakes into catastrophic character flaws and minor disappointments into catastrophic betrayals. Mislabeling doesn't just reduce reality. It warps it into something far darker than it actually is. Think about how mislabeling plays out in everyday life. A person trips in public and immediately tells themselves, I'm such an idiot. That's not a description of what happened. It's an attack on identity. Another person struggles at work and thinks, I'm a complete failure. Again, the exaggeration isn't rooted in fact. It's rooted in distorted emotion. Mislabeling turns an event into a judgment so extreme that it creates shame, hopelessness, and anger. When directed outward, mislabeling can poison relationships. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and instead of thinking, that was careless, the mind leaps to, they're a terrible human being. People like that are scum. Mislabeling transforms a single act into a sweeping, inaccurate condemnation of the entire person. Over time, these exaggerated judgments build walls of hostility, making forgiveness and empathy nearly impossible. The roots of mislabeling often lie in environments where language itself was used as a weapon. Children who grew up hearing harsh words, you're stupid, you're worthless, you're a loser, internalize those labels. As adults, they continue the cycle, using the same distorted language against themselves. Even if no one else calls them those names anymore, the inner critic takes over. Mislabeling becomes the voice of past wounds carried into the present. Culture reinforces mislabeling too. We live in a world of extremes, where language is often amplified for impact. Social media thrives on outrage, exaggeration, and emotional intensity. Instead of calling something disappointing, people call it the worst ever. Instead of calling someone mistaken, they call them garbage. This constant exposure to exaggerated language seeps into personal thought patterns, making mislabeling feel normal, but what feels normal can still be toxic. The cost of mislabeling is devastating. When you mislabel yourself, you create shame so heavy it feels unbearable. Calling yourself stupid or worthless doesn't leave room for improvement. It convinces you that you are fundamentally broken. This belief kills motivation, because why try if you are beyond fixing? Mislabeling fuels depression, anxiety, and self-hatred. It takes normal human imperfection and twists it into evidence of permanent defect. When you mislabel others, the cost is division. Harsh words leave scars. A partner who is mislabeled as useless in a moment of anger may carry that wound for years. A child who hears, "You're a failure," may internalize it as truth. Mislabeling doesn't just distort, it wounds, and those wounds often outlive the moment of anger that caused them. Mislabeling also damages how you interpret the world. If every challenge is disastrous, if every mistake is unforgivable, if every problem is impossible, then life begins to feel hopeless. Language becomes the lens you see through, and exaggerated words create exaggerated suffering. So, how do you dismantle mislabeling? The first step is awareness. Pay attention to the words you use about yourself and others. Notice when they are emotionally charged, exaggerated, or extreme. Ask yourself, am I describing the event accurately, or am I attacking with distorted words? Catching mislabeling in the moment is the key to loosening its hold. The second step is reframing language. Replace harsh, exaggerated words with balanced ones. Instead of, I'm a failure, say, I made a mistake. Instead of, they're terrible, say, they acted badly in this situation. Language matters. Words carry weight. Shifting words softens distortion and brings thought closer to reality. Self-compassion is also crucial. Mislabeling thrives on cruelty, on the habit of attacking yourself with vicious words. To dismantle it, you must replace cruelty with kindness. Ask yourself, would I say this to someone I love? If the answer is no, then it doesn't belong directed at you either. Another tool is mindfulness. Mislabeling is fueled by emotional reactivity. When you're angry, ashamed, or hurt, the distortion amplifies your words. By practicing mindfulness, slowing down, breathing, observing thoughts without judgment, you can create space between feeling and labeling. In that space, you gain the ability to choose kinder, truer words. Empathy helps dismantle outward mislabeling. When someone disappoints you, instead of labeling them as horrible, pause to consider context. Maybe they were stressed, distracted, or overwhelmed. Empathy doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it prevents you from exaggerating it into something it isn't. Therapy and journaling can also help. Writing down your harsh self-labels and then challenging them with evidence weakens their power. For example, if you write, "I'm worthless," force yourself to list times you contributed, helped, or succeeded. The exercise proves that the label isn't fact, it's distortion. The truth about mislabeling is this: it makes the world crueler than it really is. It convinces you that you are broken, that others are evil, that life is unbearable. But reality is more nuanced. You are not worthless. You are imperfect in learning. Others are not monsters. They are flawed humans making mistakes. Life is not ruined by a setback. It is simply unfolding with challenges and opportunities. Freedom begins with words. When you soften the words you use, you soften the distortion. When you replace cruelty with accuracy, you reclaim truth. And when you choose language rooted in compassion, you begin to heal wounds mislabeling left behind. Because here's the reality. You are not the names your distortion calls you. You are not stupid, worthless, or broken. You are a human being, learning and becoming. And no mislabel, no matter how loud, can erase that truth. Hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is often called the "I knew it all along" distortion. It happens when, after an event has already taken place, the mind convinces you that the outcome was obvious, predictable, or inevitable. It tricks you into believing that you should have seen it coming, that you should have acted differently, and that the pain or failure you experienced could have been prevented if only you had been wiser. On the surface, it looks like insight, but in reality, hindsight bias is a distortion that creates unnecessary guilt, shame, and harsh self-judgment. Think about how this plays out. You enter a relationship that eventually ends painfully. Looking back, you think, "I should have known. The red flags were obvious. I was so stupid not to see them." But here's the truth. Those obvious red flags only appear obvious now, in hindsight. At the time, you didn't have the same perspective. You were making decisions with the information and feelings you had then, not the clarity of hindsight. Yet the distortion convinces you that your past self should have known better. Or consider financial decisions. Someone invests in something that doesn't work out. Later they think, "I should have known it was risky. It was so clear." But in the moment, the future was uncertain. Choices were based on probabilities, not certainties. Hindsight bias erases that uncertainty and pretends the outcome was inevitable all along. It makes you blame yourself for not having the foresight of a prophet, when in reality, no one could have predicted perfectly. This distortion thrives on rewriting memory. Before something happens, reality feels uncertain. After it happens, the outcome feels obvious. The mind unconsciously reshapes memory, erasing doubt and replacing it with a false sense of inevitability. This is why people look back and think, "How could I have been so blind?" when in truth, they weren't blind. They were simply human, navigating uncertainty as best as they could. Hindsight bias often has roots in environments where mistakes were punished harshly. If you grew up hearing, "You should have known better," every time something went wrong, you may internalize the belief that not predicting outcomes is a personal flaw. As an adult, you replay events with brutal self-judgment, convinced that your failures were due to stupidity rather than the simple unpredictability of life. Culture reinforces this distortion too. Whenever tragedies occur, in politics, economics, or disasters, commentators rush to say, "The signs were obvious, it should have been prevented." But in reality, countless possible outcomes existed before the event. It is only after the fact that one path looks clear. Hindsight bias oversimplifies complex events, turning them into stories of inevitability. The cost of this distortion is heavy. On a personal level, it fuels guilt and shame. You beat yourself up for mistakes, convinced you should have known better. You carry regret like a burden, replaying scenarios in your head with if-only statements. If only I had left sooner. If only I had said no. If only I had seen the signs. These regrets don't change the past. They only add suffering in the present. Hindsight bias also erodes self-trust. If you constantly judge past decisions as stupid, you begin to distrust your ability to make good choices in the future. You hesitate, overthink, and avoid risks because you are afraid that once again you'll look back and condemn yourself. The distortion doesn't just attack your past, it sabotages your future. So, how do you dismantle hindsight bias? The first step is recognizing its nature. Understand that clarity is always easier after the fact. Life doesn't give previews, it gives experiences. The mind only connects the dots once the picture has already formed. Accepting this truth softens the harshness of hindsight. The second step is self-compassion. When you catch yourself saying, "I should have known," reframe it to, "I didn't know, and that's okay. I made the best choice I could with what I knew then." Compassion acknowledges that you are not a fortune teller. You are a person navigating uncertainty. Another step is learning without blaming. Reflection is useful when it teaches growth, not when it fuels shame. Instead of asking, "How could I have been so stupid?" ask, "What can I learn from this experience?" One question opens the door to growth. The other locks you in regret. Mindfulness also weakens hindsight bias. By practicing presence, you learn to accept uncertainty as a constant part of life. You realize that not knowing the future is not failure, it is reality. Mindfulness trains you to stop replaying the past with distorted clarity and instead focus on what is unfolding now. Another tool is rewriting the story. When you catch yourself saying, "It was obvious," force yourself to list the uncertainties you faced at the time. Write down the reasons why the outcome was not predictable. This exercise reveals how hindsight is tricking you, and it restores a more accurate memory of the decision-making process. Hindsight bias also requires you to release the illusion of perfection. There is no life without mistakes, no path without detours. Expecting yourself to always predict perfectly is unrealistic. The goal is not to avoid every mistake, but to grow through them. Freedom comes when you stop punishing yourself for not being all-knowing. The truth about hindsight. T-bias is this: it lies. It tells you that you should have known when you couldn't have. It convinces you that your suffering was self-inflicted when it was simply part of the unpredictability of life. It erases uncertainty and replaces it with false inevitability. But life was never inevitable. It has always been uncertain, and your decisions were made in that uncertainty with the best knowledge you had. Freedom begins when you forgive yourself for not knowing then what you know now. It begins when you accept that hindsight is not truth, it is distortion. And it begins when you replace regret with growth, shame with compassion, and judgment with understanding. Because here's the reality. You are not stupid for not seeing what was coming. You are human. And being human means learning through experience, not predicting the future perfectly. The day you stop punishing yourself with hindsight is the day you start living with peace in the present. Just world fallacy. The just world fallacy is one of the most seductive distortions because it promises us comfort in an uncertain world. It whispers the idea that the universe is fair, that people get what they deserve, and that everything balances out in the end. On the surface, it feels reassuring. If the world is fair, then goodness will be rewarded and wrongdoing punished. If we live correctly, nothing too terrible will happen to us. But beneath that comfort lies a dangerous distortion, because life does not always work this way. At its heart, the just world fallacy is the belief that suffering is always deserved and success is always earned. It makes you think that victims must have done something wrong to cause their pain, and that winners must have done everything right to earn their success. This distortion simplifies life into neat categories of justice. But reality is far more complex. Good people suffer. Cruel people prosper. Hard work doesn't always guarantee success, and misfortune doesn't always come from mistakes. The danger of the just world fallacy is that it creates both cruelty and guilt. When someone else suffers, the distortion leads us to blame them. They must have made bad choices. They brought this on themselves. When we ourselves suffer, the distortion turns inward. This must be my fault. I must have done something to deserve this. Either way, the result is harsh judgment, not compassion. Consider how this distortion plays out in everyday life. Imagine someone who loses their job unexpectedly. Instead of recognizing that economic forces, company politics, or bad luck may have played a role, the mind leans into the just world fallacy. They must not have been good enough. If they worked harder, they'd still have it. The belief creates blame where none belongs. Or think of someone who develops illness. Instead of compassion, people may spur. They must not have taken care of themselves. They must have done something wrong. Again, the distortion makes suffering feel deserved. When directed inward, the distortion is even more painful. Imagine a person who faces heartbreak. Instead of acknowledging that love involves risk and uncertainty, they think, "This happened because I wasn't lovable enough. I must have deserved this pain." Or, a child who grows up in abuse may internalize the belief, "Bad things are happening because I'm bad. If I were good, this wouldn't happen." The just world fallacy transforms random or unjust suffering into a story of personal fault, chaining people to shame that isn't theirs to carry. The roots of this distortion lie deep in human psychology. Humans crave order. We want to believe the world makes sense, that actions have predictable consequences, that life is governed by fairness. Without that belief, life feels terrifyingly random. The just world fallacy gives us a sense of control. If we do the right things, we'll be safe. If we avoid wrong actions, we'll avoid pain. It's a comforting illusion, but still an illusion. Culture reinforces this distortion constantly. We hear sayings like, "You reap what you sow," "Everything happens for a reason," "What goes around comes around." These phrases sound wise, but they erase the truth that sometimes suffering is senseless. Sometimes cruelty goes unpunished. Sometimes goodness is unrewarded. And when we believe too strongly in these cultural mantras, we end up blaming victims instead of helping them. The cost of the just world fallacy is enormous. It breeds judgment toward others. When people suffer, we distance ourselves by saying, "They must have deserved it." This makes us feel safer, but it also makes us less compassionate. It prevents us from reaching out, from offering help, from acknowledging the unfairness of their pain. It also fuels denial. When something bad happens to someone like us, instead of recognizing our shared vulnerability, we tell ourselves, "They must be different. That would never happen to me because I do things right." This illusion keeps us blind to our own fragility. The distortion also creates crushing guilt. When something bad happens to us, instead of recognizing the role of chance, circumstances, or the choices of others, we assume we brought it on ourselves. We think, "If I had done better, this wouldn't have happened. If I were good, this wouldn't be happening." This false belief chains people to unnecessary suffering, making them responsible for pain they didn't cause. So, how do we dismantle the just world fallacy? The first step is to face reality with courage. Life is not always fair. This truth is painful, but it is also freeing. If suffering is not always deserved, then your pain is not always your fault. If success is not always earned, then your failures are not proof of worthlessness. Recognizing unfairness allows you to release misplaced blame and guilt. The second step is cultivating compassion. Instead of asking, "What did they do to deserve this?" ask, "How can I support them in this unfair situation?" Instead of asking yourself, "Why did I deserve this pain?" remind yourself, "Sometimes bad things happen for reasons beyond my control. I can care for myself through it." Compassion disrupts the distortion by replacing judgment with understanding. Another step is reframing cultural beliefs. Instead of clinging to sayings, like, "Everything happens for a reason," shift to, "I can find meaning in what happened." The first implies that suffering was deserved. The second acknowledges that meaning is something we create afterward. Meaning-making is empowering because it allows us to grow through unfairness without blaming ourselves for it. Mindfulness helps too. By grounding yourself in the present, you stop spinning stories about cosmic fairness. You see events as they are, painful, unjust, difficult, without attaching distorted explanations. Mindfulness doesn't erase unfairness, but it softens its sting by keeping you anchored in reality rather than illusion. Finally, dismantling the just world fallacy requires embracing uncertainty. Life cannot be fully predicted or controlled. Goodness doesn't always guarantee safety, and mistakes don't always guarantee punishment. But this uncertainty isn't only terrifying, it is also liberating. It means your suffering is not proof of unworthiness. It means you are not defined by what happens to you. And it means compassion matters, because everyone is vulnerable. The truth about the just world fallacy is this: it's a comforting lie. It promises fairness, but delivers judgment. It promises order, but creates guilt. The real world is more complicated, sometimes brutal, sometimes beautiful, often unfair. But in that complexity lies freedom. Because when you release the lie of cosmic fairness, you stop blaming yourself for undeserved pain, and you start cultivating compassion for yourself and others. Because here's the reality: life is not always fair, but your response can be. The world may not always give justice, but you can give kindness. And when you choose compassion over judgment, you create a small pocket of justice in an unjust world. A justice that heals, even when life does not. Overestimation of danger. The distortion of overestimation of danger is one of the mind's oldest survival tricks, but also one of its cruelest prisons. It convinces you that threats are greater, risks are higher, and danger is closer than it really is. At its root, it is the brain's attempt to protect you, but instead of keeping you safe, it often keeps you trapped. Trapped in fear, trapped in avoidance, trapped in a world that feels far more hostile than it actually is. This distortion has evolutionary roots. Thousands of years ago, survival depended on vigilance. If our ancestors mistook a shadow for a predator, they wasted a little energy, but if they mistook a predator for a shadow, they risked their lives. The brain learned to err on the side of caution, to assume danger even when it wasn't there. That bias kept our species alive. But in modern times, it often turns against us. Because now, instead of lions hiding in the grass, the dangers we fear are social rejection, failure, embarrassment, or uncertainty. Yet the brain reacts as though these modern threats are life or death. Think about how this plays out in everyday life. A student hesitates to raise their hand in class, convinced that if they answer wrong, everyone will laugh and judge them. The actual risk is small, but the mind exaggerates it into a catastrophe. A person avoids applying for a job because they fear rejection. They imagine the humiliation, the disappointment, the pain of failure so vividly that they never even try. Another person avoids relationships because they fear heartbreak, imagining that the pain would destroy them completely. In each case, the danger is not as large as the mind makes it, but the distortion convinces them otherwise. Overestimation of danger often shows up as catastrophic thinking. A small symptom becomes a sign of serious illness. A delayed text becomes proof of betrayal. A mistake at work becomes a career-ending disaster. The distortion takes possibility and inflates it into inevitability. Instead of saying, "This could go wrong," the mind insists, "This will go wrong." And instead of acknowledging, "It would be hard, but I could survive it," the distortion claims, "It would destroy me completely." This distortion also feeds anxiety disorders. People with generalized anxiety, phobias, or panic often live under constant overestimation of danger. A crowded room feels suffocating. A plane feels like a death sentence. A performance feels like humiliation waiting to happen. The body responds to these exaggerated dangers with real physiological stress: racing heart, shallow breath, tense muscles. The fear feels real because the body doesn't distinguish between imagined and actual danger. Relationships suffer under this distortion as well. Someone who overestimates danger in relationships may constantly anticipate betrayal, abandonment, or rejection. They may become controlling, overly cautious, or distant, trying to protect themselves from a danger that hasn't arrived. Ironically, this very behavior often damages the relationship, creating the outcome they feared. Overestimation of danger becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The roots of this distortion often lie in past trauma. A child who grew up in a dangerous, unpredictable environment learns to be hyper-vigilant. They overestimate danger because danger was real. But as adults, even in safer environments, the brain keeps reacting the same way. The world feels threatening, even when it isn't, because the nervous system never learned to stand down. Culture amplifies this distortion too. News media thrives on fear, highlighting dangers constantly. Crime, disasters, crises. Social media spreads stories of betrayal, heartbreak, and humiliation. We are surrounded by narratives of danger, which feed the brain's tendency to exaggerate risk. The result is a world that feels more dangerous than statistics actually show. The cost of overestimating danger is enormous. It leads to avoidance. avoiding opportunities, avoiding risks, avoiding life itself. You say no to new experiences because they might be dangerous. You stay in comfort zones, not because you want to, but because you are afraid to step out. Life shrinks, not because the world is small, but because fear makes it small. It also creates chronic anxiety. Living as if danger is always around the corner keeps your body in constant fight or flight mode. Over time, this wears down health, weakens immunity, and drains energy. You end up exhausted, not from real danger, but from the imagined danger your mind constantly warns you about. So, how do you dismantle this distortion? The first step is reality checking. When you feel fear, pause and ask, what evidence do I have that this danger is real? What is the actual likelihood? What are the facts? Often you'll realize that the fear is exaggerated. You may still feel it, but recognizing the distortion loosens its grip. The second step is shifting perspective. Instead of asking, what if this goes wrong? Ask, what if this goes right? Instead of focusing only on risk, also consider possibility. Fear narrows vision to danger, but reality contains opportunity too. Broadening perspective restores balance. Another step is building tolerance. Overestimation of danger thrives on avoidance. Every time you avoid a feared situation, the fear grows stronger. But when you face it, even in small steps, you teach your brain that you can survive it. This is the principle of exposure therapy, gradually confronting fears until the brain learns that the danger is not as great as it imagined. Mindfulness is also powerful here. Fear thrives on imagined futures, on stories of what might happen. Mindfulness grounds you in the present, where danger is often absent. By returning attention to your breath, your body, your surroundings, you remind yourself that right now you are safe. Self-compassion helps too. Instead of shaming yourself for being afraid, remind yourself, fear is natural. My brain is trying to protect me, but I don't have to believe every warning it gives me. This gentle stance prevents you from adding shame to fear, and it creates space to respond with courage. The truth about overestimation of danger is this. It is a survival instinct misapplied. It tries to keep you safe, but ends up keeping you small. It convinces you that life is more dangerous than it really is, robbing you of experiences, opportunities, and joy. But the world is not as terrifying as the distortion claims. Freedom begins when you stop believing every fear is fact. It begins when you reality check, when you face small risks, when you step into the world despite fear. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It is action in spite of fear. And every time you act, you prove to yourself that the danger was not as big as you thought. Because here's the reality. Life will always have risks, but those risks are far smaller than your distortion makes them seem. And the only real danger is letting fear control you more than reality does. Underestimation of ability. The distortion of underestimation of ability is one of the quietest, yet one of the most crippling lies the mind tells. It convinces you that you are less capable than you truly are. It whispers that you don't have what it takes, that you're too weak, too unprepared, too flawed to face challenges. It minimizes your strengths, magnifies your doubts, and keeps you from even trying. And the cruelest part? Most of the time, the limits you believe in are not real. They exist only in your head. This distortion often comes disguised as humility. You tell yourself, I'm just being realistic. I'm not talented enough for this. Other people are stronger, smarter, braver. I don't have what it takes. But this is not realism. It is distortion. Because the truth is, humans consistently underestimate their resilience, their strength, and their ability to adapt. History, psychology, and personal experience all show us that people are capable of far more than they think. But underestimation blinds you to that truth. Think about how this plays out. A person avoids applying for a job because they assume they won't qualify. Another avoids starting a project because they believe they'll fail before they begin. Someone else avoids speaking up in a group because they're convinced their thoughts aren't valuable enough. In each case, the distortion stops them, not because they're incapable, but because they believe they are incapable. And by never trying, they never get the chance to prove themselves wrong. The tragedy of this distortion is that it often builds a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you can't do something, you won't attempt it. And because you don't attempt it, you never discover that you could have succeeded. Your lack of action becomes evidence of your lack of ability. You think, See, I didn't do it. I must not be capable. But the truth is, you didn't do it because you didn't try. The cycle repeats, reinforcing a false belief in weakness. The roots of this distortion often lie in childhood. Many people grow up in environments where their efforts were criticized or dismissed. A child who was constantly told, "You're not good enough," or who was compared to others, learns to doubt their ability. Over time, this doubt becomes internalized. Even as adults, no matter how much they achieve, they carry the belief that they are never quite capable enough. Culture amplifies this distortion too. We live in a world that glorifies extraordinary achievement while ignoring ordinary resilience. We see highlight reels on social media, comparing ourselves to people who seem effortlessly talented, successful, or confident. We forget that behind every success are countless failures, doubts, and struggles. Instead, we conclude, they can do it because they're special. I can't because I'm not. This comparison fuels chronic underestimation. The cost of underestimating your ability is enormous. It limits growth because you never take the risks that lead to new skills. It limits opportunity because you never step forward when doors open. It limits resilience because you never give yourself the chance to discover how strong you really are. And it damages self-esteem because the more you avoid, the more you see yourself as incapable. Relationships are also affected. People who underestimate themselves may become dependent on others, believing they can't manage on their own. They may settle for less, staying in unhealthy dynamics because they don't think they're strong enough to leave. They may silence their voices, convinced their opinions don't matter. Underestimation robs them not only of personal growth, but also of equality and connection. So, how do you dismantle this distortion? The first step is noticing the language of self-doubt. Pay attention to phrases like, "I can't," "I'm not good enough," "I'll never be able to." These phrases often appear automatically, but they are not truth. They are distorted beliefs. Catching them in the moment allows you to challenge them. The second step is reframing ability. Instead of asking, "Am I capable of doing this perfectly?" ask, "Am I capable of learning, growing, and improving through this?" Ability is not fixed. You don't need to be ready before you start. You become ready by starting. Shifting focus from perfection to growth dismantles the distortion. Another powerful tool is action itself. Underestimation thrives in imagination. You imagine failure so vividly that you avoid action, but action proves imagination wrong. Every time you try something you feared, you collect evidence of ability. Even small actions, speaking up once, applying once, practicing once, build proof that you are more capable than your distortion suggests. Self-compassion is crucial too. Underestimation often grows from harsh self-criticism. If you demand perfection from yourself, you will always feel incapable. But if you allow yourself to be imperfect, you create space to see progress. Compassion doesn't mean lowering standards. It means allowing yourself to grow without constant self-sabotage. Another step is looking back at your history. Ask yourself, how many times did I think I couldn't handle something, and then I did? Most people discover that their track record of survival is far greater than they realized. Breakups, losses, failures, challenges, things that once felt impossible were endured. This is proof of ability, yet the distortion erases it. Reclaiming that memory weakens the distortion's hold. Mindfulness also helps. Underestimation often comes from projecting into the future, imagining challenges as overwhelming. Mindfulness anchors you in the present, where you only have to deal with what's in front of you right now. By focusing on one step at a time, you stop overwhelming yourself with imagined mountains. The truth about underestimation of ability is this: you are stronger than you think. Humans are wired to survive, to adapt, to grow. You have already faced countless challenges and made it through. The distortion tells you that the next challenge will be different, that this time you'll fail. But history, your history, proves otherwise. Freedom begins when you stop letting fear define your limits. It begins when you stop waiting to feel ready and start acting anyway. It begins when you recognize that ability isn't about perfection, but about persistence. You don't have to be fearless, you just have to move despite fear. Because here's the reality: you are far more capable than you believe, and the only way to prove it is to stop underestimating yourself and start giving yourself the chance to rise. Fear of rejection. The fear of rejection is one of the most universal distortions of the human mind. Almost everyone feels it at some point, yet for many, it becomes a constant shadow that limits relationships, ambitions, and even self-expression. At its core, this distortion convinces you that rejection is unbearable, that if others disapprove of you, criticize you, or walk away from you, it is proof of your unworthiness. It doesn't just make rejection feel painful, it makes it feel like destruction. This distortion thrives because rejection touches the deepest human need, belonging. We are wired for connection. From our earliest days, survival depended on acceptance within the group. To be cast out meant danger, isolation, even death. That ancient wiring still lives in us, which is why rejection hurts more than almost any other experience. But while rejection today rarely threatens survival, the mind still treats it as life-threatening. The fear exaggerates rejection into catastrophe. Think about how this plays out. A person avoids speaking up in class or meetings because they fear their ideas will be dismissed. Another avoids confessing feelings because they fear being rejected in love. Someone else avoids pursuing opportunities, auditions, promotions, partnerships, because they can't bear the thought of being told no. In each case, the distortion exaggerates the pain of rejection so much that people stop themselves before they even try. The cruel irony is that the fear of rejection often creates the very outcome it dreads. When you avoid risks, you miss opportunities to connect, grow, or succeed. When you hide parts of yourself, people can't truly know or love you. When you hold back in relationships, partners may feel distance and drift away. By trying to avoid rejection, you often end up reinforcing isolation, the very thing you feared. This distortion also magnifies past pain. If you were rejected in childhood, by peers, parents, or authority figures, those experiences leave deep imprints. The child who wasn't chosen for the team, who wasn't invited to play, or who was criticized at home, learns that rejection is unbearable. As an adult, even small rejections reopen old wounds. The distortion doesn't just fear the present, it carries the pain of the past into every new situation. Culture intensifies this distortion too. Social media constantly broadcasts approval in the form of likes, comments, and followers. It equates attention with worth. When approval is absent, it feels like rejection. Movies and stories glorify romance that begins with perfect acceptance, leaving no room for the messy reality of risk and rejection. We grow up believing rejection is a verdict on who we are, not simply a mismatch of timing, preferences, or circumstances. The cost of this distortion is heavy. It limits relationships because fear keeps you from being authentic. You hide your flaws, silence your opinions, and avoid vulnerability because you think, if they see the real me, they'll reject me. But authenticity is the very thing that builds genuine connection. Without it, relationships remain shallow, unsatisfying, or fragile. It also limits ambition. Fear of rejection keeps people from chasing dreams. Writers never share their work. Entrepreneurs never launch their ideas. Leaders never step forward, all because the possibility of hearing no feels too painful. Entire lives are diminished, not because of rejection itself, but because of the fear of it. And perhaps most painfully, it damages self-worth. When you live in fear of rejection, you start to define yourself by the approval of others. Their acceptance feels like proof of value. Their rejection feels like proof of worthlessness. You become trapped in an external measure of identity, unable to stand in your own inherent value. So, how do you dismantle this distortion? The first step is reframing rejection itself. Rejection is not proof of unworthiness. It is simply feedback that this opportunity, person, or circumstance was not the right fit. Everyone experiences rejection. Even the most talented, loved, and successful people hear no. It is not a verdict on identity. It is a natural part of life. The second step is building resilience. Instead of avoiding rejection, practice facing it in small doses. Speak up in a group, share an idea, take a risk. Each time you face rejection and survive, you teach your brain that it isn't deadly. The pain fades and confidence grows. This gradual exposure weakens the distortion's grip. Another step is grounding your worth internally. If your identity depends on others' approval, rejection will always feel unbearable. But if your worth is rooted in your values, your growth, and your authenticity, rejection loses power. It still stings, but it doesn't destroy you. You realize that rejection says more about the other person's preferences than about your inherent value. Self-compassion is crucial here. When you experience rejection, the distortion often piles on shame. Of course they rejected me. I'm unworthy. To dismantle this, respond with kindness. This hurts, but it doesn't define me. I am still valuable. Treating yourself with gentleness prevents rejection from hardening into self-hatred. Mindfulness also helps. Fear of rejection thrives on imagined scenarios. What if they laugh at me? What if they leave? What if I embarrass myself? Mindfulness pulls you out of the imagined future and back into the present, where rejection has not yet happened. It reminds you that worry is not fact. Another powerful perspective shift is realizing this. Rejection is also protection. When someone rejects you, they are revealing misalignment. The job, the partner, the opportunity was not right for you. Rejection clears the path for what is right. Seen this way, rejection is not only survivable, it is useful. The truth about fear of rejection is this. It exaggerates pain and underestimates resilience. It convinces you that rejection is unbearable, when in reality, rejection is survivable, and sometimes even necessary. Without it, you cannot find true belonging, because true belonging requires authenticity. Without it, you cannot grow, because growth requires risk. Without it, you cannot succeed, because success requires hearing no on the way to yes. Freedom begins when you stop treating rejection as proof of unworthiness. It begins when you face the risk of no in order to create space for the possibility of yes. It begins when you realize that your value does not shrink when others fail to see it. Because here's the reality. Rejection is not the end. It is simply redirection. And the day you stop fearing it is the day you start living freely, authentically, and fully. Dependency thinking. Dependency thinking is one of the most subtle but most limiting distortions of the human mind. At its core, it convinces you that your happiness, your stability, and even your survival depend entirely on someone else. It tells you that you cannot function, succeed, or thrive without the presence, approval, or guidance of another person. While connection and interdependence are natural parts of being human, dependency thinking distorts that truth and replaces it with a fragile belief. I am nothing without them. This distortion shows up in relationships, friendships, families, and even workplaces. Imagine someone who believes they cannot be happy unless they are in a relationship. Every decision, every mood, every sense of worth depends on whether their partner is close, attentive, or approving. If the partner is upset, their world crumbles. If the partner pulls away, they panic. Their emotional stability is chained to another person's choices. That isn't love or connection, it's dependency. Or think about someone who believes they cannot succeed at work without constant validation from a boss or colleague. They downplay their own skills and contributions, waiting to be told they are doing well before believing it themselves. If praise comes, they feel strong. If silence comes, they feel like a failure. Their sense of competence doesn't come from within, but from someone else's words. This is dependency thinking in action. The distortion often starts in childhood. A child who grew up in an environment where love or safety was conditional, based on obedience, performance, or caretaking, may learn to tie their sense of self to others' reactions. If they were only praised when they pleased others, they grow up believing that approval is the foundation of worth. If they were punished with silence or withdrawal, they learn that abandonment equals destruction. These early experiences create deep dependency patterns that follow them into adulthood. Dependency thinking also shows up in unhealthy dynamics. In relationships, it can manifest as clinginess, people-pleasing, or fear of being alone. The dependent person feels unable to make decisions without guidance, unwilling to act without reassurance, unable to leave even when the relationship is toxic. The fear is not just about losing the person, it is about losing their very sense of self. Culture reinforces this distortion in subtle ways. Romantic stories often glorify the idea of being completed by another person, as if individuals are half-formed until they find love. Songs, movies, and books romanticize the idea that I can't live without you. While poetic, these messages can reinforce dependency, making people believe that needing someone completely is proof of love. In reality, it is often proof of fear. The cost of dependency thinking is immense. It creates fragility because when your identity depends on another, their absence shatters you. It creates imbalance because relationships become unequal. One person carries the weight of both lives. It creates resentment because dependency often demands too much from the other person, who may feel suffocated under the pressure. And it creates stagnation because dependency prevents you from growing into your full strength. In some cases, dependency thinking even leads people to tolerate abuse. They convince themselves, I can't survive without them. If I leave, I'll be nothing. If I lose them, my life is over. This belief keeps them trapped in harmful situations, unable to see their own strength. Dependency is not just limiting, it can be dangerous. So, how do you dismantle dependency thinking? The first step is awareness. Notice when your thoughts begin with, I can't, or I need them in order to. Ask yourself, is this truly about need, or is it fear disguised as truth? Recognizing dependency is the key to loosening its grip. The second step is building internal anchors. Instead of tying your worth to someone else's presence or approval, tie it to your own values, strengths, and progress. Ask yourself, what do I believe in? What strengths have I shown? How can I ground myself in me? The stronger your internal anchor, the less dependent you become on external ones. Another step is practicing independence in small ways. Make decisions without asking for reassurance. Spend time alone and discover you can be okay in your own company. Set boundaries in relationships, even if it feels terrifying. Each small step builds confidence, teaching you that you are capable of surviving, deciding, and thriving without leaning completely on another. Self-compassion is crucial here. Dependency often comes with shame for being too needy or too weak, but shaming yourself only deepens the distortion. Instead, acknowledge dependency as a survival strategy you learned long ago. Thank yourself for surviving with the tools you had, and gently teach yourself new ones. Compassion opens the door to growth. Mindfulness also helps. Dependency thrives on the fear of abandonment, on imagining catastrophic futures where you are alone and destroyed. Mindfulness grounds you in the present, reminding you, right now, I am okay. Right now, I am alive. Right now, I can handle this moment. The more you practice presence, the less power imagined abandonment has over you. Therapeutic support is often powerful for dismantling dependency. Therapy provides a safe space to build self-trust, to learn that your worth is not conditional, and to practice autonomy. Journaling can also help, writing down your fears of being alone, then challenging them with evidence of times you managed on your own, builds proof of your strength. The truth about dependency thinking is this: it is not love, and it is not truth. It is fear disguised as need. It convinces you that you are incapable on your own, but the reality is that you are far stronger than you realize. Relationships can enrich your life, but they should not define your existence. Love should add to your strength, not replace it. Freedom begins when you stop handing your worth to others and start reclaiming it for yourself. It begins when you realize that you are whole, even without approval, attention, or presence. It begins when you replace "I am nothing without them" with "I am enough on my own." Because here's the reality. You may want others, you may value others, but you do not need anyone to prove your worth. You already have it. And the day you stop depending on others for your identity is the day you begin to live as your full, powerful self. False happiness expectations. False happiness expectations are one of the most seductive distortions of the human mind. They promise a future where everything will finally make sense, where life will finally feel complete, where suffering will finally vanish, as long as you achieve a specific condition. I'll finally be happy once I get that job, once I lose that weight, once I buy that house, once I find the perfect partner, once I earn that money, once I reach that milestone. These thoughts don't just motivate, they trap you in a cycle of perpetual waiting, convincing you that happiness is always somewhere out there in the future, never here, never now. This distortion thrives on illusion. It makes happiness conditional on external achievements, possessions, or circumstances. It convinces you that joy and fulfillment are rewards to be unlocked after meeting certain standards, instead of states you can nurture in the present. The cruel truth is that even when those goals are reached, the happiness they bring is often fleeting. You celebrate for a moment, feel accomplished for a while, but then a new expectation replaces the old one. Now I'll be happy once I achieve the next thing. The cycle never ends. Consider how this plays out. A student believes they will be happy once they graduate, but after graduation, the pressure sauce shifts to finding a job. Once employed, the pressure shifts to promotions. Each stage is supposed to deliver happiness, but each only brings new expectations. Or think of someone chasing wealth. They imagine happiness at 10,000, then 100,000, then 1 million. But satisfaction keeps moving further away, always just out of reach. False happiness expectations work like a mirage. The closer you think you get, the further it shifts. Relationships are another arena where this distortion thrives. People believe, I'll finally be happy once I find the perfect partner. But once they're in a relationship, happiness doesn't automatically arrive. The partner is human, flawed, and imperfect. Disappointment arises, and suddenly the expectation shifts. I'll be happy once we fix this problem, once we move in, once we get married, once we have kids. Each milestone brings joy for a moment, but then reality returns and new expectations appear. Happiness is always postponed. The roots of this distortion lie in both psychology and culture. From childhood, many are taught to delay happiness until certain goals are reached. I'll be proud of you once you get good grades. You'll feel good once you win. You'll be happy once you achieve. This conditional view of joy becomes internalized. As adults, we continue to tie happiness to achievements. Culture intensifies this by constantly broadcasting messages that happiness is a product you can buy, a status you can earn, or a lifestyle you can display. Media sells the dream that once you look a certain way, live in a certain house, or own certain things, you'll finally feel whole. But it's a lie, a distortion designed to keep people chasing endlessly. The cost of false happiness expectations is profound. It robs you of the present. If happiness is always later, you never fully enjoy now. You spend your life chasing instead of living. It also breeds disappointment, because even when expectations are met, reality rarely matches the fantasy. The new car still breaks down. The new job still has stress. The perfect partner still argues. Life remains imperfect, no matter what. When expectations are unrealistic, reality always feels disappointing. It also damages self-worth. When happiness is tied to achievements, failure feels devastating. If you don't reach the milestone, you don't just lose the goal, you lose the happiness and worth you attach to it. You think, I'll never be happy because I failed. This creates despair, anxiety, and a constant sense of inadequacy. So, how do you dismantle false happiness expectations? The first step is recognizing the distortion for what it is, an illusion. Happiness is not a finish line. It is not something you earn once life meets your terms. It is a state you cultivate, regardless of circumstance. The more you tie happiness to external events, the more it slips away. The second step is practicing presence. Instead of postponing joy, train yourself to find it in ordinary moments. A conversation, a sunset, a meal, a laugh. The more you practice noticing what is already here, the less power false expectations have. Mindfulness is especially powerful here. By anchoring yourself in the present, you realize that joy exists now, not only later. Another step is reframing goals. Achievements can bring satisfaction, but they should not be the sole condition for happiness. Instead of saying, I'll be happy once I achieve this, shift to, I'll be proud of myself for working toward this, but I can still find joy along the way. This reframing turns happiness into a journey, not just a destination. Self-compassion also helps. False expectations often come from a harsh inner critic that says you must prove yourself worthy of joy. Compassion dismantles this lie by reminding you, you are already worthy of happiness, even before you achieve anything. You don't have to earn the right to feel good. You already have it. Another powerful practice is gratitude. False happiness expectations focus on what is missing. Gratitude focuses on what is present. By regularly reflecting on what you already have, your strengths, your relationships, your experiences, you shift from scarcity to abundance. Gratitude doesn't erase goals, but it prevents goals from stealing your happiness. The truth about false happiness expectations is this: they are endless. There will always be another milestone, another achievement, another condition. If happiness depends on the future, it will always remain just out of reach. But if you root happiness in the present, you stop chasing and start living. Freedom begins when you realize happiness is not something you wait for. It's something you create, moment by moment. It's in the conversation with a friend, the satisfaction of effort, the quiet of a morning, the resilience of surviving. Happiness is not the reward for a perfect life. It is the companion for an imperfect one. Because here's the reality. If you wait for life to be perfect to be happy, you will wait forever. But if you learn to embrace joy here and now, you will discover that happiness was never out there in the future. It was always within you. Outcome-based worth. Outcome-based worth is one of the most dangerous distortions because it convinces you that your value as a human being depends entirely on what you achieve, what you produce, or what results you deliver. It ties your sense of identity and self-esteem to outcomes, making success feel like proof of worthiness and failure feel like proof of worthlessness. At its core, this distortion tells you, you are only as valuable as your latest result. On the surface, outcome-based worth looks like motivation. It pushes people to achieve, to perform, to win. It says, work harder, do better, earn more, then you'll finally matter. But beneath the surface, it creates a fragile identity built on conditional self-worth. Because what happens when you fail? What happens when the results don't come? What happens when circumstances change and success is taken away? If worth is tied to outcome, then failure doesn't just hurt, it destroys. Think about how this plays out. A student ties their entire sense of value to grades. When they earn an A, they feel proud, confident, alive. But when they fail a test, they collapse into shame. I'm stupid. I'm worthless. The grade is no longer just feedback. It is a verdict on who they are. Or consider an athlete who ties worth to performance. Winning makes them feel like a hero. Losing makes them feel like a failure at life. Their self-esteem rises and falls like a roller coaster, completely dependent on results. This distortion is common in careers too. Many professionals tie their worth to promotions, salaries, or recognition. When work goes well, they feel strong. When they face setbacks, they feel useless. Entire lives are reduced to a scoreboard of outcomes. Even relationships are affected. Some people tie their worth to whether someone loves them, marries them, or stays with them. When loved, they feel valuable. When kidded, they feel worthless. In all cases, the self is chained to external outcomes. The roots of this distortion often begin in childhood. Many children grow up hearing conditional praise. I'm proud of you because you won. I love you because you did well. You matter because you obeyed. Over time, the child learns that worth is something to be earned, not something they inherently possess. They grow into adults who continue chasing outcomes to feel valuable, never realizing that their worth was always unconditional. Culture reinforces this distortion constantly. We live in a world that glorifies results, wealth, status, fame, achievements. Media showcases success stories as if those outcomes are proof of value. Social media amplifies this, with likes, followers, and numbers becoming markers of worth. We are taught to measure ourselves by outcomes, forgetting that outcomes are temporary. A business can fail, a job can be lost, a relationship can end. If worth is tied to those outcomes, self-esteem collapses with them. The cost of outcome-based worth is devastating. It creates chronic anxiety because you always feel pressure to perform. Rest feels dangerous because if you're not producing, you're not valuable. It creates perfectionism because only flawless outcomes feel good enough. It creates despair because failure feels like proof that you are fundamentally broken. And it creates emptiness because even when you succeed, the satisfaction fades quickly. The bar moves higher and you think, now I have to achieve more to stay worthy. This distortion also damages relationships. When you believe your worth is tied to outcomes, you may demand the same of others. You may only value people for what they produce, not who they are. Or you may feel unlovable unless you're constantly giving, achieving, or proving. Relationships become transactional instead of genuine. So, how do you dismantle this distortion? The first step is recognizing the lie. Outcomes are not identity. Success and failure are experiences, not definitions. They measure performance, not worth. The grade measures understanding of one test, not intelligence. The job title measures one role, not the value of your existence. The relationship measures compatibility, not your capacity to be loved. The second step is separating effort from identity. Instead of saying, I failed, therefore I am a failure, reframe it to, I failed at this task, but I am still capable of learning and growing. Effort, results, and identity must be uncoupled. You are not what you produce. You are who you are. And that worth is unchanging. Self-compassion is vital. Outcome-based worth thrives on harsh self-criticism. Compassion dismantles it by reminding you, I am valuable because I exist, not because I perform. My worth is inherent, not conditional. This doesn't mean giving up on goals. It means pursuing them without chaining your identity to them. Another step is redefining success. Instead of tying worth to outcomes, tie it to values. Am I living authentically? Am I growing? Am I aligned with what matters to me? These measures are not dependent on external validation. They are internal, and they cannot be taken away by failure. Mindfulness also helps. Outcome-based worth often lives in the future, in goals, results, and imagined achievements. Mindfulness grounds you in the present, reminding you that you are worthy now, even without proving anything. You don't have to achieve to deserve peace, joy, or rest. Another powerful practice is unconditional relationships. Surround yourself with people who value you for who you are, not what you produce. Learn to give the same gift to yourself. This dismantles the distortion by showing that love and worth are not earned. They are given freely. The truth about outcome-based worth is this. It is fragile. It collapses with every failure, every rejection, every setback. But real worth is unshakable. It is not earned, and it cannot be lost. It exists simply because you exist. Freedom begins when you stop chasing worth through results and start living from the truth that you are already worthy. Goals then become expressions of growth, not conditions of identity. Success becomes joy, not proof. Failure becomes learning, not shame. Because here's the reality. You are not your outcomes. You are not your grades, your titles, your income, your achievements, or your failures. You are more than all of them combined. And the day you let go of outcome-based worth is the day you begin to live with freedom, peace, and authenticity.